His abilities may be of Jor-El's blood, but it was his time in Smallville with Jonathan and Martha Kent and all the people there that made Clark Kent a hero. Now, in a Digging for Kryptonite event years in the making, we revisit the seminal, decade-long television series Smallville, starring Tom Welling, and how its reinterpretation of a legend cemented my fandom and brought the Man of Steel into a new era. The final act of a Superboy fan journey is at hand. These are the Trials of Smallville. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superboy fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. These are the Trials of Smallville, and joining me to discuss the downfall of Lex Luthor is one of the hosts of Always Hold On to Arrow, returning guest Lance Laster. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk about another double L.
I know we have Lance Laster here for Lex Luthor. Couldn't have planned it any better. But I have to say, we have a destiny together, Lance, only on different sides of the Zoom screen, not of life.
Yes. It's the stuff of legend, you know?
The stuff of legend. Now, look, your Smallville fandom, your Smallville journey, well known to any of our listeners who have also checked out Always Hold On to Smallville. You've been a frequent guest on that show. Let me start by just asking this. Smallville's interpretation of Lex Luthor, as crafted by the writers and brought to life by Michael Rosenbaum, this take on Lex, great take on the character or greatest take on the character?
You know, that's tough. I think it is a great interpretation of the character. And I think Rosenbaum is the best to do it. But to me, my GOAT Lex is the animated Lex. That's my guy.
Okay. I can't begrudge you that. But I will say for myself, this remains. It has been and it remains. And I think always will be, though we keep an open mind, my favorite interpretation of the character.
Okay.
And I felt that way for a while, and having continued my rewatch, albeit cherry picking episodes, not rewatching everything. Yeah. The rewatching has really reaffirmed that. I think through the writing and through the performance, they were able to inject so much humanity and tragedy into this presentation of the character. And over the course of the 7 seasons that Michael Rosenbaum was a regular, you got to see all of these different sides of the character. It never felt one note to me. You got to see him be charming and endearing, calculating and devious, and then, ultimately cruel and murderous. But I always felt like what we were seeing, not that we justify the behavior or excuse the behavior, but it always felt informed by what was going on around him. And one of the things that I've always said, and maybe it's debatable whether or not this is a positive, but to me, I look at why ultimately Lex turns bad, goes evil, has this downfall. Like what is the cause of that downfall? To me, it's not any one thing, right? I look at it and I say, well, we have his upbringing at the hands of Lionel. We have the betrayals that he experiences, particularly from some of the women in his life. We have all of this unexplained pain, all these unexplained events in his life. And we have this failed, broken friendship with Clark, who never trusted him and, according to Lex, turned his back on him. So to me, I don't pin it down to any one thing. And I look at that as a strength of the show, that is sort of this confluence of events. I'm curious how you view Lex's downfall, just from that kind of global perspective. Do you see it as that mix of factors, or do you boil it down to one thing? And do you view it as a positive or not?
It's a mixture of things. I think his downfall is as you mentioned, you point out a lot of things, but at the same time, it also kind of boils down to one thing, and it's his the lack of love that he got in general. And that was the one thing he was always searching for, was love and acceptance. And then when you don't get that, you see what it does to somebody. And that's essentially what happens to Lex. We see it with Lex at the very beginning of the show, right? We see how Lionel treats young Lex, and then we see his face when he is bald after the meteor shower, and you see this like face of pure disgust. And this is prior to us knowing anything about the family up until this point. Like, we just see that like Lionel is an abrasive father to this kid who is definitely a very sensitive kid, and he has no empathy or sympathy for him. He's just trying to make him tough, and he clearly doesn't understand his own son. And then that traumatic event happens, and it's very clear that he gets no support after the events of that. No real support, no support that he really actually needs, right? And then he has a chance encounter with Clark. He meets this very intriguing and good-natured human being, and he is obsessed in both all the good and bad ways about it, right? He's obsessed because he sees somebody who is a good person. He's probably never met one in his life up until that point. And he is just completely enthralled by this farm boy who risked his life to save him. And he seems like he has this great family that he's envious of. But at the same time, he kind of knows that there's something up about it, but he wants to, but we see in those early seasons, he lets it go because he's like, I finally have a friend, right? And so he allows himself to not be bothered by the fact that he keeps secrets. He allows himself to not be bothered that like he doesn't really fully trust him, but he's trying to earn it. And then he tries to earn that same trust with the parents. He tries to earn that same trust with the community of Smallville. And then we see things just go awry time and again for various reasons. And at the beginning, I think he had the best of intentions with a lot of things, including some of his romantic endeavors, but things go awry for various reasons, some of which were his own reasons. And then everything just kind of just chips away until there's a breaking point. And then at that point, what is left is the Lex Luthor that we all know, the evil villainous Lex Luthor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, going back to where you started, that inability to love, right, informed by everything that he experiences, but specifically that lack of love, right? Yes. He hasn't received true love for the most part, for most of his life, and in turn is arguably incapable of loving, something that Lana directly charges in the season 6 finale. She says, you're not capable of love. So yeah, it's a tragic portrait of this character. And I have to say, just from the outset and going back to sort of the fan journey aspect in all of this, this was a wholly new incarnation for me when I first started watching Smallville, because I was growing up reading the modern era comics where they had no past together. They met as adults. Lex was significantly older. In fact, in the comics of the Triangle era, Lex and Perry White were contemporaries.
Yes.
So this was a whole new spin on it for me at the time. And even now, having gone back.
Also, wasn't he president in the comics when this show debuted?
Yeah.
I mean, like that, like, because that was the whole Imperiex thing, and like the destruction of Topeka, and like the Luthor presidency, which they did at the same time as the 2000 election. Like, so that was all planned. So like that was a whole thing. And so, it like with the origins of the show, like I was like, oh, well, this is new.
Yeah, very much so. And, even now, having gone back and read those Silver Age comics, and in particular that Silver Age retelling of Lex's origin story, where you see him in Smallville. Initially, he's a fan of Superboy, and then we know things go awry, and that turns to hate. But this show obviously was able to delve so deeply into this dynamic between the two of them. And it's really, even though I am open to other interpretations of the character, and we've talked about virtually all of them on the podcast over the years, this is the one for me that still looms largest in my head and in my heart when I think of these two characters. And I do sort of always long for that past between them, that broken friendship, and even maybe the possibility for redemption, for finding that friendship again. And as we're speaking, I mean, in the comics at the moment, that's kind of an idea that finally is back in play, which has delighted me to no end.
I've enjoyed that aspect of the Superman run right now. So I think that's pretty cool. That's one of the reasons why I picked up the book, because I read like what they were going to do. I was like, oh, all right, well, yeah, you got me.
Yeah. So
I watched Smallville for 10 years. So yeah, like I'm down with this.
Absolutely. So I think as we talk about Lex over the course of this episode, I think some of the biggest picture questions that we've already started to get at of, what accounts for his descent, his downfall, and what role does Clark play in all of this? And again, maybe we can sort of end on this note of, is there any potential for redemption at some point in the future? because we'll touch just briefly on Crisis. I do want to kind of share my little take on that, and it sort of feeds into that there. But there's a very well-known to Smallville fans episode from late in season 6 called Nemesis. And in that episode, you have Lex trapped in these tunnels underground that are filled with kryptonite. Mm-hmm. And Clark goes in after him. And it's the first time that the characters really have an opportunity for a heart-to-heart, because the friendship really had been broken by that point, but they're forced into this situation where they're trapped. Clark can't use his abilities because of the kryptonite. And so you have this opportunity for them to articulate aspects of their friendship that I think it was pretty illuminating and insightful. And at one point, Clark says to Lex, "Were we ever really friends, Lex?" And Lex responds, "I honestly don't know. I don't have anything to compare it to. You're the only real friend I've ever had, Clark." Mm-hmm. I guess he kind of forgot a little bit about Duncan at the Excelsior Academy.
Oh, man, yeah.
Which was not that many episodes prior, but
we'll
put that aside for a moment here. But just this idea of I don't know if the friendship was real. I don't have anything to compare it to. You're the only real friend I've ever had. I kind of want to use that as a jumping off point to kind of launch us back to the beginning of the show, and especially those first, let's say, 3 seasons. I think, just like Zach and I talked about, we can carve up the series generally in a number of different ways.
Yes.
Arguably, you can carve up Lex's arc in a number of ways, but I really do look at Covenant, the season 3 finale, where Lionel leads Clark to that room that Lex has been keeping with his investigation into Clark and the Kents as a major, major breaking point, even though they do try to salvage the friendship. So looking at those first few seasons, very generally, you could take this wherever you want, but how would you characterize Lex and the dynamic between Clark and Lex in those early seasons? Is it a true friendship? Is Lex even capable of that at that point in the show?
I think so. And I think what actually the relationship is with them, and especially season 1, is big brother, little brother. That's like adopted big brother, adopted little brother. That's essentially what that is. And that is the dynamic that I give off. Lex is older. He's more worldly. He comes from privilege. He has money. He's had all these experiences. He's been all over the world. The small town boy looks up to Lex. He's like, "Oh, well, this is cool." He goes over to his house. They play pool. He lives in this mansion. And like Lex is telling him all these stories about Alexander the Great and all this other stuff. And to a freshman in high school, if you went over to an older person's house that was like that, a rich older person's house, and he's quoting all these books and knows classical music and knows all these things, right? You would think that person was the coolest person in the world. And it's very obvious that Clark did. And he loved that. And you could tell that Lex enjoyed having somebody like him. And I think that's how they're like, that's the root of their friendship. Like that was in that first season. Like they're learning to do it. Clark already has friends, right? But like this is a different type of person. He's an outsider, right? He's somebody that his parents don't necessarily approve of. And so there's that aspect of Lex that he found apparently it was dangerous. It runs contrary to Clark's nature. And it kind of made Clark popular at school. That he knew Lex Luthor, that he hung out with Lex Luthor. So like all those things were working into his favor. Lex liked having somebody to talk to. Lex liked having a nice person be in his orbit that wasn't trying to leech off of him, wasn't asking him for money, wasn't asking him for things. And so Lex could kind of spoil him, like as he did, like, give him giving him tickets to things and, doing fireworks at his first party and, all these types of things, trying to help him get with Lana. Like he was doing, like, I think it was genuine in this first season. I think it was the most genuine it could possibly have been was the first season.
Well said. I concur with all of that. And it's funny, I was thinking about the fireworks too. The matchmaking. I mean, numerous attempts, not just at giving Clark advice about Lana, but actively trying to lend a hand when he invites both of them to that benefit in Metropolis. And it's like, oh, look, you're both here. He was really looking out for him. Side note, though, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, we got to give a special shout out to Pete Ready to Rumble Ross, because this guy, I think more than anybody, the Kents, Jonathan in particular, was certainly skeptical from the start about Lex, but Pete consistently across the seasons on the show. And hell, even when he came back for that one-off in season 7, he's like, what the hell is Lionel Luthor doing in your kitchen? So shout out to Pete Ready to Rumble Ross, because he saw it from the start.
Look, man, like I'll just go out and say it. Like, this is why you need to have a black man in your corner, because we won't steer you wrong.
Hey, there's that scene. We'll jump back and forth, but in the episode Asylum and certainly Shattered and Asylum, huge tentpole moments in Lex's journey here. But in Asylum, this is the point where Lex has been institutionalized. Lionel has made it appear that actually has driven him crazy, essentially, but he knows Clark's secret and he wants Clark to break him out. And Clark and Pete are having this conversation in the Torch, and Pete's talking about how challenging it is. He always has to remember to call it meteor rock and not kryptonite, and he's always got to cover for Clark's exits and all of this. And essentially he's like, but it's okay because I got your back. Lex doesn't.
Don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
absolutely.
So shout out to Pete Ross. But yeah, I mean, I think that's very much the dynamic in those early seasons, the first season in particular. But you see in Lex, I think that tension between being inspired by Clark, and he says that, again, jumping way ahead to season 7 Descent, when they have their big showdown in Lex's office after Lionel's death, and Clark is like, they're talking about their friendship, and Lex said, I did try. I was inspired by you in the beginning. So I think, to your point, there's something very good and pure and different about Clark than what Lex has experienced in his world.
Yes.
Yet the tension, I think, always is that there is this mystery. There's so much unexplained about Clark Kent. And from the jump, from their first encounter on that bridge, when Lex loses control of his car and crashes into Clark, and they go off the bridge, and Clark rips the car open and frees Lex and saves him. From that moment, as the series progresses, there are all of these situations and moments that can't be accounted for. Clark's wrapped up in everything. The caves, the caves and the stones and the alien ship. It's like Clark is always there, and we don't have these explanations for it. And it is something that Lex proves incapable of letting go. And that tension, it never goes away. And even in those season 1 episodes, like Rogue, I think, is a great example, where we have Phelan, the dirty cop from Metropolis, who finds out Clark's secret. At the end of that episode, as Phelan is dying after the shootout with the cops, Lex rushes in and he's like, what did you know about Clark? What did you know about Clark? So it's always there, but I think there, I guess, was enough of a balance, or Lex was able to overcome that enough to maintain, I think, a true friendship at that point.
He was at that point, but the thing is, like, at the end of the day, he's still who he is. He's still a Luthor. He's still a person that came from privilege, and he is somebody that is used to getting what he wants, knowing what he wants when he wants it. And so with Clark, that was the one thing he couldn't have, right? Like, ultimately, like, yeah, he got a friend, but what he really wanted to know was the secret, because that was most valuable. And for somebody like him, that knowing that secret was valuable to him, because he knew it was something that would make that it was something that held power. Right. And all of the things that Lionel talks to him about ultimately is about power, how to keep it, how to wield it. And Lex, in an effort to try to get approval from his father, took all of those lessons. He learned all of them. Right. And so he tried to fight off those lessons as much as he could for the sake of the friendship, but eventually just took over. He had to build that room to find out what was going on with Clark, because he couldn't let it go. He needed that control. He needed to know whatever it was. He couldn't help himself.
Absolutely. I also love how, again, going back to the pilot, I love that it's not just that Clark saves Lex when they go off the bridge, but that later in the episode, you have Lex return the favor and save Clark when he's strung up as the Scarecrow. And as much as we've talked about how we learned about Smallville coming about in the first place, we didn't really drill down on that marketing campaign, and specifically that iconic poster of Clark strung up as the Scarecrow with the red S painted on his chest and the kryptonite necklace. That was everywhere. And to this day, you search Smallville, that's one of the first thing that comes up.
Well, the funny thing about that is that's how I found out about the show. Was I was reading a comic book, and then the back advertisement on the back page of one of them was that picture. And it was just that picture and date. And I was like, are they making a Superman show? Like, that's cool. And so, of course, like, I was tuned in to watch it. I had no idea Lex Luthor was going to be in it. And so, like, in the first episode, I was like, oh, we're doing this. This is cool. And so like, that's how that's how I found out about the show, was that. But you're right. Like, like, Lex is saved. And of course, he's already peaked. His interest is peaked because, like, he gets the car, we find out, and he's inspecting it to see, like, how Clark was able to save him. Right. And And he sees like, well, that's weird, right? And then he sees Clark, this, you know, 6'4", specimen of a human being tied up in a field. It's like, and I'm pretty sure he's like logically thinking, he's like, who is big enough to put this guy up here? But for TV logic, is like, why is this kid being bullied, right? And that's something that he resonates with because we find out that he was a bullied child. So, and then like he just kind of rushes off like nothing happened and doesn't really want to talk about it. But so again, his curiosity's piqued.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things. So I love the fact that they save each other in that pilot, binding them together, I think even further than just the bridge save. But the fact that Lex sees Clark in an uncharacteristically, for Clark, vulnerable position up there on the post, even though, like you said, Clark does then speed away, and how, how could you explain that? But, so again, right from the jump, there's this notion of, I hit you. Like, I'm certain I hit you, yet you survived. Sure, But then he sees Clark vulnerable in that way. And to the show's credit, because at a certain point, especially with the number of episodes that they do, it could get to the point where, how have you not figured this out? But in fairness to the show, there are enough instances along the way where Clark is powerless. And
in his presence.
In Lex's presence. And even just in season 1, the episode, you used the word leech earlier, and that reminded me of the episode where Eric Summers leeches Clark's powers. And that's the episode where Lex has hired Roger Nixon to look into Clark. And he has this whole digital recreation of the bridge accident. And the only logical mathematical solution to this is that the car did hit Clark. But this is the episode Clark doesn't have his powers. And this is after Eric, I think, throws Clark, I don't know how many feet into a car, and Clark's all bruised up and he can't walk. And Lex sees this.
Yes.
And that's not the only instance of this.
There are many more, right? And especially like you mentioned, like when they're in the tunnels, right? Like he's bleeding, like it's like, and he looks at him, is like, "You happy now? You satisfied?" And so, and granted, Clark is like still gaslighting him, but like at the same time, like he's protecting himself, because at that point he knows that Lex does not have his best interests at heart. They're not friends at that point. So it is necessary for him to do so.
Speaking of the gaslighting, so it's a big picture question and idea about Lex on the show. There's a moment, I believe it's in the season 4 premiere or thereabouts, I want to say, where Martha says to Clark, she articulates this idea of, there's so much that's unexplained in Lex's life. Essentially, you can't blame him for trying to find the answers. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things, as you watch all of these seasons, there is so much that Lex experiences that he can't make sense of. And when we circle back to this idea, and it's actually a question that Clark articulates to Martha in that season 6 episode Nemesis of, what if the Lex is the way he is because of me? What level of responsibility, if any, does Clark bear for how Lex turned out? And it's a fine line. I really think about this a lot, because I guess this is where I draw the line, and tell me where you do.
Okay.
I'm okay with Clark preserving the secret about himself.
Yes.
But there's still so much more that Lex is seeing in this town. Mm-hmm. And I guess the clearest example that really jumps out at me, and it's an episode I rewatched earlier today, but Descent, when they're having, again, that big showdown in Lex's office. And Lex says, like, this is Smallville, cryptic symbols, alien ships, these threats are real. And Clark is like, listen to you, your paranoid delusions.
Yes.
And it's one of those things. It's like, well, he hasn't imagined those things, but you're trying to make him think he has.
Yes.
That's hard to kind of square, I guess.
It is, yeah, because again, like, preserving the thing about himself, keeping that a secret. Sometimes, like, I wish like Clark would have just been like, look, like, everybody knows the meteor shower was, like, I'm pretty sure like people mark down the date of the meteor shower in Smallville, like it's a thing, right? And especially in a small town, that would definitely be a thing that they would commemorate. And I'm pretty sure he's like, look, like, the meteor rocks all over the place. We all see that it does weird stuff to people. And so, I mean, like, it's weird. We don't know what it is, obviously, but like, it's doing weird stuff. I can't explain it. What do you want me to do? Like that, like, that's what he could have, that could have saved him a lot of grief if he just was just like, look, I can't tell you how this affects people. I know it's here, but I don't know. And that could have probably saved some things. I don't know what he would have done about the Kawachi caves, though. That's a whole different story. But the occurrences of like meteor rock and meteor affected people is like, Clark's like, I have nothing to do with that. I mean, a dude wanted to make put tattoos like infused with that stuff, like tattoo ink. It's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how it works.
Well, this is something I've also been wrestling with. We get a number of what if episodes over the course of the show. One of them, Apocalypse, we already talked about, where Clark sees what the world would be like if he had never arrived there. Yeah. There's one that you and I will certainly hit on in this discussion, Lexmas, where Lex gets to see what happens if he turns over a new leaf and gives up this quest for money and power. The what if episode that I really wish the show had done is what would have happened if Clark had confided in
Told
Lex.
Him the secret?
Yeah.
You know, that would have been a really good episode, I think. And I think they probably would have done what they did with Reckoning, like where like he has to undo it because it just causes too many it causes too many dominoes to fall in the wrong direction.
No, absolutely. I think that genie would have to be put back in the bottle. But I think, I don't know. I just feel like it would have been helpful for Clark and the audience. For the audience, I think it would have been a fun, fascinating episode. But for Clark, just to kind of give him that assurance that, no, he made the right call in not confiding in Lex. And we do see there are numerous points in Onyx when Lex is split into good and bad versions where the bad Lex sees, and in Vessel when he's being prepared for Zod to inhabit him and he learns the secret, but then he free. So we see instances where Lex knows temporarily, but it's still a different dynamic than if they showed us what it would have looked like if Clark had proactively confided in Lex. What would that have done? Because you get to Arctic, Michael Rosenbaum's last appearance, last scene on the show until he pops back up in the series finale. And Lex is going on about, you didn't trust me. I could have helped you. I could have helped you become a hero. You never thought about what we could accomplish together. I mean, that's what he's saying, but I think there's a good argument that's not what he would have done, but it would have been interesting to see that.
Well, and the thing is, I think it would have gone the episode probably would have gone that direction. He would have had the best of intentions, right? But then, of course, those intentions and what the true underlying cause of all those is something probably far more nefarious, right? Like he would have used him, he would have abused him, he would have abused that knowledge, and everything that we probably think would have happened would have likely happened. That's probably what would have ended up going on. And Clark knew that because, again, as the show is progressing, like without knowing the secret, he is doing the 33.1 without knowing the secret. He's doing all these things, experimenting on people and doing evil stuff in the background, committing murder, like doing all these crimes without knowing that he has the possibility of having the ultimate insurance in having Clark as an ally or a lapdog. Right. So I think we kind of know what direction would go down. It reminds me of, the ending of All-Star Superman, right? Where Clark's just like, Lex, if you truly cared about saving the world, you would have done so already. Right. Like you didn't which is the best part of that story is when, spoilers, when Lex sees it like the world as Superman does. And he starts crying because he realizes he's like, I've been wrong this whole time. Right. Like, and then Clark hits him with that ultimate truth bomb. And so seeing something like that would have been cool. And if I were in charge, I'd probably do something like similar to that, like in their last interaction. But yeah, like he wouldn't have wanted to make anything better. He just would have wanted to make himself into what he wanted to make himself into. And likely Alexander the Great, because that's the narrative the entire time.
Yeah, very much so. You mentioned earlier, you referenced the Stuff of Legend line from the episode Hug, where we deal with a couple of meteor-infected former salesmen, one of whom has become this hermit out there in the woods, and the other one has used his ability for personal gain and to the detriment of the communities that his company has torn through. Yeah. And it culminates in a standout early in the show scene between Clark and Lex in the barn, where they're referencing this broken friendship between these two former best friends. And Clark says, do you think that'll ever be us? And that's where, as you referenced, Lex is like, trust me, Clark, our friendship will be the stuff of legend. as a 14-year-old kid watching that back in the day for the first, oh man, I love, like, that was the stuff I lived for. I love those little moments like that. It was great.
Same. Well, especially considering like the show starts off giving us people who are sworn enemies growing up together as friends, and it's a great dynamic for storytelling. It's very much what we get with Charles Xavier and Magneto, but just like if they had met when they were children, like if they like instead of meeting when they were like young adults and going through what they're doing. But the dynamic and what they kind of created was very similar to how you have these two people who are on the opposite sides kind of want the same thing, but like they can't be aligned because philosophically they're too divergent, and so but the difference being that while Lex is just a straight up evil person, and that's what he turns out to be, Magneto is good intentioned. It's just his methods are, it's just like, no, we got to stop you. Like, you can't do that. So yeah, but again, like this is like, you think, like I mentioned the animated series earlier, you have episodes like Brave New World where you have Clark and Lex working together, right? And it's like, and you see what happens. Like, it's not good. Especially with Luthor being the one that was in charge. And if Clark had told him the secret, going back to your what if thing, Lex would have definitely made it so that he was in charge of that relationship. He would have been the alpha of their equation, and that's probably what would have happened.
No, absolutely. And I think especially in these early seasons, you see a Lex who's trying to overcome the image that people have of him because of his last name. I think you see that with the town generally, but specifically with the Kents, perpetually trying to win Jonathan's favor in particular.
Absolutely.
The matchmaking efforts between Clark and Lana, again, the fireworks, just trying to help, constantly offering legal or medical assistance through his through his resources wherever possible.
Best doctors in Metropolis.
I mean, the number of times where they just dump all over the poor personnel at Smallville Medical because they're just never up to the task. They always have to fly somebody in from Metropolis. But
a specialist in from Metropolis.
Yeah, but you see that. Yet at the same time, you do see, going back to this idea of the means, right, that he would employ, that he's not Clark, right, and he will get his hands dirty in a way that Clark and the people in his world wouldn't, or at least at this point in the show. In terms of his dealings with Phelan, and especially when we get the backstory in the Zero episode where we see that club shooting that Lex was involved in, and for a time it seems like Lex was the shooter. It turns out he wasn't. He was trying to protect somebody. But still, there's some skeletons in his closet. And even the fact that he employs Roger Nixon in the first place to dig into Clark. And then at the start of season 2, shoots and kills Roger Nixon before Nixon can reveal that Lex had hired him. Now, ostensibly, he did it to protect Jonathan, but hand in hand with that, he preserved the secret. So never a saint. But again, I think overall well-intentioned, I suppose, though, again, the means were still on the somewhat questionable, devious side.
Oh yeah, for sure. But again, that's, he can't escape his upbringing, like, and his nature. Like with Smallville, we talk a lot about nature versus nurture, right? Which is a huge theme for the show, and it's best exemplified by Lex, right? Like, he can't help the Luthor education that he received. Like, it informs all of his decision making and his actions, even when presented with the loving nature of the Smallville community and the Kents, and genuine friendship and acceptance and working to earn respect instead of demanding it, as Jonathan wanted him to, like all those types of things and those values that they try to instill in him, and he tries to absorb, ultimately gets thrown and cast aside because his true nature overrides all of that.
And on the note of that upbringing, Lionel, right, a figure who looms so large across so much of the series. And as we've talked about, that juxtaposition in parenting style between the Lionel and the Kents is apparent from the jump. And episodes in particular, I always think of Jitters and Insurgents, where you have these hostage situations, and then Clark and Lex being reunited with their parents, but just such a stark contrast between the loving reunion on the Kent side and just this cold dynamic between Lionel and Lex. Those always stand out to me.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. Especially because like when Clark and his parents were reunited at Jitters, and like they're just so happy. Like that shot of them, the kids, like when they're hugging and stuff. It's in like the opening montage of the opening credits for a couple of seasons, right? And it's because like they're so joyful and like the smiles are so genuine, and you can really see the love in the family. And then you see Lex and Lionel. It's like the coldest thing ever. It's like, oh my god, and it just again, it like it hits you over the head with it, but it kind of has to. It's like, yeah, this is the difference. It reminds me of my favorite movie. We're talking about like favorite movies off mic. My favorite movie is Jerry Maguire, and at the end, after they have their big night, like Jerry and Tidwell are hugging, and like the quarterback and the other rival agent, the quarterback's like, how come we don't have that type of relationship? And his agent tries to hug him, and the quarterback just pushes him away. He's like, no, this is not how this is going to go. It's basically like that.
Yeah, that dynamic between them, I think we'll drill down on that a little bit more when we get to Shattered, Asylum, and Memoria, because there's so much, especially when we get into the backstory that comes up there. But
yeah,
when we get to the finale of season 1, Tempest, this is an instance where I give the show a lot of credit for its restraint, especially when you factor in, we know the show will eventually go 10 seasons, but at the time, as Alan Miles have talked about, they had this 4 to 5 year plan, right, initially.
Yeah. So did Arrow.
And yeah.
Look where that got us.
I know, man.
Tune in to always hold on to Arrow, folks.
But with Tempest, I remember at the time, and for folks who need a little bit of a refresher, that episode opens with, my God, like such a cool sequence of Lionel landing, getting off the helicopter, greeting everybody at the Luthor Corp plant, making these remarks, but then announcing that the plant is closing and all these, and gets right back on the helicopter. It's such a good sequence. And it just kind of ties into this overall idea of this very tough love approach to parenting that Lionel employs in theory to toughen Lex up, to make him prepared for all the challenges that he'll face. But there is just this lack of pride, of warmth that permeates their interactions. But you get to the climax for Lex of that episode after the twister is hit, and Lionel is pinned down, and there's this beam that is about to impale him, and Lex is standing there, blood streaming down his face. The imagery is fantastic. And he hesitates. And that's the cliffhanger for Lex. And I remember at the time, because it was still early. I mean, we had a whole season, but it was still early in the show. And I remember thinking, okay, like this is it. Like they're going to go. And obviously they didn't. They held back. Lex ultimately saved him. But that moment of hesitation is a key point in his journey. But I do applaud the show for holding back at that point, because that would have been too much too early. But again, I think it just stood out to me because that was a moment of, okay, no, this is really going to be a long journey and a slow burn. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like as you said, like admire the restraint. We don't. That's something missing in TV nowadays is the restraint on stuff, because we had the slow burn of Lex over his the first 7 seasons is this it's the descent into madness that people like doing, right? Like, and so but we get 7 years of it. Like, it's the slowest burn possible.
Absolutely. And really quickly, I'll just mention we also have that Hourglass episode early on where we get this glimpse into Lex's future, where he's brought about nuclear annihilation, and we'll continue to revisit that moment in numerous ways across the series. But like you said, kind of tying into the then current comics at the time, Lex being president, it was this. I can't.
I was blown away. I was blown away when I saw that. I was like, oh, they know what they're doing.
That's the thing. I can't stress enough how this show was just cooking. And it was all working for me at the time, because there was so much that felt familiar, like a moment like that's kind of pointing towards Lex's presidential future. Yet there was so much that was new, and or that was a different spin on what I had experienced before. And it made for a very potent mix. And I was just there for it. I was there for it.
Same.
So there's that. Now, in season 1, we do have this relatively short arc with Victoria Hardwick involved in some corporate espionage, and she and Lex embark on this relationship. She ultimately betrays him. At the very end, we find out that she's been engaged in relations with Lionel while she's been carrying on this relationship with Lex. So going back to this idea of betrayal, especially from his love interests, that's something we see here. We see that early in season 2 with Desiree Atkins in the episode Heat, but most notably, and I have been dying to talk about this with someone.
Okay.
What do we make of Helen Bryce, Lance?
You know, it was good to see her. I'll say that. But ultimately, it's like that episode of Seinfeld where he like dates somebody that's just like him, and he realizes that it's like, oh, she is just like me. How did I not see this? That's kind of what I'm thinking with Helen Bryce. Like she has like, yeah, doctor, right? Cool. But like she had a Luthor mind. When you really go back and look at it, it's like, oh yeah, like they're kind of the same person. Like, and in this situation, one of them is not long for this world, and it's not going to be Lex.
True. I guess, again, for people who need a refresher, Helen Bryce is this doctor who Lex meets and embarks on this romantic relationship with, and ultimately marries at the conclusion of season 2. And then we have this big cliffhanger as he wakes up on the plane as they're on their way to the honeymoon, and she's gone, the pilot's gone, and the plane is about to crash. And that's where we end season 2 for Lex. And this leads to, again, we talk about seminal moments in Lex's journey, the start of season 3 and his time on that island and that psychotic break as he's imagining this other inhabitant of the island there.
The raft!
Yeah. And important setup for what's to come as we get into Shattered and Asylum, where from the outside, it seems like, oh, Lex has had another psychotic break until you realize that was engineered by Lionel. But it's an important moment. I guess I bring up Helen because certainly it was a substantial romantic interest over Lex's arc on the show. And it was
until Lana, the most substantial.
Absolutely. And a major betrayal. But also, I mean, can we square her characterization? Does it track all the way through? Because I rewatched a lot of these episodes recently, and it just feels like such a flip at the start of season 3 with her.
Yeah, there was a lot of changes being made like behind the scenes on that one, because I don't think when she signed up to do the show, that's what it was like. I like that was one of those. It's like, oh, it's going to constantly change until they kind of found what they wanted and found what they thought was going to work.
And that's how it plays. And so it's a little disappointing because it didn't feel like she was in any way, shape, or form the Black Widow that then she appears to be at the start of season 3. She comes back into the mansion. She's got all these shopping bags. Yeah. And she's really treated herself. The only thing I can sort of headcanon maybe is that Lex did confess at the end of season 2 before the wedding that he had stolen the blood sample that we know belonged to Clark.
Yes.
And so maybe that was enough to sort of set her off or change her view of him enough to change her plan. I mean, I don't know. I genuinely do not think at all that this was the plan with the character from the start. I think this was a major pivot, but kind of looking at the life of the show, it's not the only time we've seen something like that. Kara towards the end of season 7, right? We have the apocalypse episode. She collapses in the kitchen. It's like, oh no, what's wrong with her? But then meanwhile, we get to the end of the season and it's like, oh no, she's just been in the Phantom Zone for the past few episodes and Brainiac's been impersonating her. So what was that about? Season 4, clearly they were trying to set up Bridget Crosby as an antagonist. That didn't work out. We pivoted to Jane Seymour as Genevieve Teague. Jensen Ackles and his Jason T character has a very abrupt shift during that season. So yeah. It's not the only time the show has done that, but with Helen, we had invested a lot in that relationship, and I was a little disappointed by that, but obviously it feeds into Lex's larger journey, so I guess we'll go with it. But you talk about what ifs, I always think about, it was an interesting thing they had set up where she had treated Clark when he had the kryptonite-induced fever and drew his blood sample and all of that. So she didn't have the full picture, but she knew more than Lex. And it would have been an interesting dynamic if they're in a relationship, but she has this ethical medical obligation to the Kent family. There could have been something there.
There really could have been. And also, again, another situation where like the right circumstances like presented itself, where Clark appears to be just like a regular person that maybe like has like an embarrassing secret, but not like an earth shattering one. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. Now, season 3, fair to say the most Lex centric of the seasons, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, I would go with that. I mean, season 7, as we get, especially into the Veritas arc, there's a lot. But yeah, overall, I would say season 3 was far and away the most Lex-centric, starting with, again, his experience on the island there. I always love when he reunites with Clark after he returns. And Clark he's so happy. This is after he's had his whole wild time in Metropolis on Red Kryptonite, and they reunite, and he's just like, Lex, I thought you were dead. And they hug. He's so happy. So still a very pure point, I think, in their friendship. And Clark was set to be his best man at the wedding. He didn't make it because he was too busy blowing up a ship, but still.
Yeah, exactly. See, and again, like if I were Lex, I'd be more mad at that than some of these other stuff. It's like, look, man, like you don't do that. That's breaking bro code. Like, if you're going to be the best man, you have to show up. It's part of the deal.
Absolutely.
It's part of the title.
Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State. And be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw Yeah. But season 3 gives us, I think 3 of the standout episodes in Shattered and Asylum, kind of our back-to-back episodes, and then later Memoria.
Yeah.
Where, I guess just let me toss it to you. How formative do you see these episodes in terms of what we're doing here and charting Lex's journey across the series?
Well, I think they're pivotal, especially Memoria. When we find out the real reason for Lionel's animosity towards him. And then I think this is honestly the first real betrayal for Lex is his mother's betrayal. It wasn't intentional, right? But the fact that he has to take the fall for her because he knows how powerful his dad is, right? Because at this point, like, I'm pretty sure their relationship was pretty normal. He was probably just a strict and scary dad, right? But he wasn't like hateful or malicious towards him. He was just a strict, powerful figure, right? And Lex is obviously a very sensitive kid, and so they probably didn't mesh well. But like Lionel still wouldn't treat him badly or mistreat him or do some of the stuff he did to him as an adult. Like I don't think that was in any of his mind. But but the fact that he had to cover for his mom and took the brunt of all of that, that's really that's the origin point. That is the point where everything changed. And that's what that was the first domino to fall that really kind of set everything into motion for that character in this iteration.
1,000%, man. When we get to that late season 3 episode, Memoria, towards the end, Lex has been trying to recover the memories that were erased as a result of the electroshock therapy that Lionel had him subjected to earlier in the season when he was in the asylum. And in that Memoria episode, as he and Clark are, in the barn, Clark says, like, Lex, why does your dad hate you so much? And that triggers that memory that you're talking about here, where up until this point, Lex and Lionel and we, the audience, had thought that Lex had killed his baby brother, Julian. And then we get this flashback as Lex uncovers this repressed memory of walking in on his mother standing over the crib with a pillow. She was the one who had killed Julian, and Lex took the fall, like you said, because he knew Lionel would protect him, right? His sole remaining heir.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to,
which is so messed up on so many levels.
Yes. But that scene between Lex and Lionel is one of the most heartbreaking moments. It really is. Where Lex reveals all of this and Lionel is like, if I had known, things would have been different. And Lex says, you might have actually loved me.
Yep.
Ugh. Again, this idea of the absence of love. He hasn't been loved, and in turn, he doesn't know how to love. And then to see that it kind of all stemmed from that moment of Lionel blaming him for the death of Julian. Lance, I'm not a psychologist, though I did take intro to psych in freshman year of college. So I feel like in a way I'm qualified.
I took educational psychology, so I think we are the most qualified people at this point.
We'll go with that. We're the most qualified people on this podcast. So
absolutely.
I've been thinking about this a lot. I feel like, bear with me on this. I think Lex performs one truly pure, selfless act in his life. And I think it's taking the fall for Lillian.
Yes.
And I think from that moment forward, it's not that he doesn't ever do anything good. We've talked about a lot of things. I think there's a lot that he does, especially in those early seasons, and hell, even in some of the later seasons, that could justifiably be called good acts. But I think that from the time we meet him in the pilot, I think the main driver is always trying to be good, being seen as good, as opposed to actually just being good. Like it's always more about trying to overcome and the way people view him. And that doesn't mean he's not bringing about good results or doing good things, but I think it's always more driven by that. And I feel like that act with Lillian, that was the one good, true, pure thing that he did in his life.
I agree with you. And I agree with you on the point of like, he like, instead of just being, he is trying to be. And when you do stuff like that, instead of you end up doing too much. You are trying too hard. Like that's what, like, we hear that term often, like you're trying too hard. Right. And we all kind of know what that means. And because it's obvious, you can tell when somebody's overdoing it. You can tell when somebody is not being genuine. Right. Like, so, and that's what some of these, small town, people that they can snuff that out very, very easily. Right. So can children. And so can a whole lot of people. They can tell when you're not being genuine about something. Everybody can tell. And so with Lex, it was very obvious. They could tell. It was like, you might be doing these things, but like, there's some other motive that you have. There's some other goal. There's some other reason for your actions outside of just doing it because it's the right thing to do, or you believe that it's the right thing to do. You might say that you're doing it because it's the right thing to do, but that's not really why you're doing it.
That's the thing. And I feel like, I know for myself, I've always characterized Lex in those early seasons. I'm like, he was the nicest guy in town. And yes, in certain respects, maybe he was, but he was always kind of informed by what we're talking about. And I think you're right. I think people pick up on that. And there's something to that. I mean, in addition to just kind of the Luthor name and all of that generally. But there's something to all of that. I mean, Memoria, absolute standout episode, pivotal revelation that we're given there. But you bring up kind of what Lionel was like before that point. And this is interesting because you're right. In Memoria, there's the whole sequence of Lex at the birthday party that no one attends. And Lionel comes in and sees this, and they have, for the two of them, I mean, a relatively tender moment of Lionel giving him the box. Right. And talking about how he could put all his doubts and fears in that box and lock them away.
And again, that was the only moment on the show where we see Lionel doing something genuine and just being a genuine father in that moment. Like he's not being a businessman. He's not being calculating. He's not teaching a lesson. He is comforting his son who just had his heart broken because nobody showed up to his birthday party. I couldn't imagine a more traumatic or like, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Like that sucks. All right. So, and he does what you would hope your father or mother or somebody to do for you in that situation.
Absolutely. Now he is totally ignorant willfully of or otherwise of the very clear postpartum depression that his wife is clearly undergoing at that moment.
Correct.
But yes, in terms of that moment with Lex, again, I hadn't rewatched Memoria in full in a long time, and I was watching that and I'm like, man, that it really is fascinating to see that Lex. Now flash forward to Fracture in season 7 when Clark goes into Lex's mind and he sees some of Lex's key memories.
Yeah.
There's a moment where we see young Alexander before the meteor shower. So this is even an earlier point in time than that Memoria birthday party.
Yeah.
Where someone has opened Lionel's briefcase and Lionel comes in assuming it's Lex, irate, right? And gets physical with him. I mean, he doesn't beat him, but he gets physical. He throws him. He pushes him against the table there. It's an ugly moment for the character, for a father. I don't even know what my question is, but it's just one of those things. I guess this ties into the Veritas arc more generally, and just kind of this idea of a retcon, rewriting the history of the show, because it does kind of put a different spin. I think you look at something like Memoria and you're like, oh, there was some humanity. There's something redeeming with Lionel as a father up until this point, until he thinks Lex killed Julian. And then there's this abrupt shift. Again, you get to that later episode and you see, oh no, there was this ugliness there, even prior to that. But I guess that you deal with the nature of a show like this that goes on so long and is continuing to fill in pieces. It does sort of make it a little bit more difficult, I guess, to draw like a clear narrative line through all of it. But always fascinating, I guess, when we get those glimpses into the before times.
Yeah, for sure. And it also kind of opens up interesting questions because, like, in that really before time, right? Like with the briefcase thing, it's like, maybe Lex wasn't the one that opened it. Maybe it was his mom.
It was.
Maybe, like, and so but like if you're like in the moment, you're just like, well, he didn't do it. Well, who was it? And then so is that like her, whatever she discovered in there, is that the catalyst for her realizing that she doesn't want a second son to live in this world, right? Like, like maybe she discovered something that she's like, that triggered the depression that followed, postpartum, in addition to, I guess, what like happens afterwards anyway. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like that could have been the setup for all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I know we talked about Memoria first, but, kind of jumping back to Shattered and Asylum. Again, I rewatched these episodes. God damn, they were so good. They were so good. I mean, both of them, but especially Shattered, where you go through this episode and Lex has recently realized that, or at least suspects that Lionel was responsible for the death of Lex's grandparents, Lionel's parents. So it's, again, sort of this blending of or pulling in aspects of the post-crisis origin story for Lex, right? But kind of pinning it onto Lionel, where in the comics post-crisis, Lex had killed his parents. But in any event, and Lex is trying to get this evidence, and he tracks down Morgan Edge, who's undergone plastic surgery and looks different, and he gets this confession, but then the evidence disappears, and someone tries to kill him. I won't recap the whole episode, but it was fascinating to watch, because you see Lex grow increasingly unhinged, and for the other characters and for us, you don't know where that line is, especially you get to the point in the episode where he is singing to quote unquote baby Julian. That's just a blanket. Right. And I just have to say, I know we're not here to do a whole Shattered discussion, but the moment where Clark pins down Darius, the security guard, and finally gets Darius to admit how they've been getting the drugs into Lex's system, when he's like, it's the scotch. It's like, because up until that point, like, you didn't know for sure. And it was, it was such a great, satisfying reveal. Yeah.
It's satisfying. Yeah.
But like, Clark believes in Lex.
Yeah, he does, and so like, and he gets the answers that he needs. So yeah, you get that confirmation. It's like, okay, so like, like now, and that's when he goes like hero mode. He's like, I got to save my friend. Yeah,
I mean, when the Kents are talking in front of the house, and Lex interrupts them, and he's like, the Kent cabal, always keeping secrets, but then Clark goes off with him. It was again, shows still at that point that friendship and what Clark believes or what he wants to see in his friend. And we get an iconic moment in that episode where Clark stops a car from hitting Lex, and it just shatters. Just like Lex's psyche in this episode. And Lex sees this. And He's like, I knew it. I was right all along. You're not even human.
Yeah.
If you were to put together a montage of Lex's arc across the series, there's no way it doesn't include the end of Shattered, of him in that padded cell in the straitjacket with Lionel looking at him. I mean, that's just like top tier Lex moment.
No, I agree. Like that is as we like to say, that is cinema.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. I mean, absolute standout moment. And then we get into Asylum, and again, Lionel ultimately subjects Lex to this electroshock therapy to remove his short-term memory, to remove these past few weeks of Lex discovering that Lionel murdered his parents. Yeah. I just have to say, I know this
and of course, and of course, in so doing, forgets the thing that he's been looking for. So it's like, again, all these things, like he gets so close and yet so far.
I know, it's so great at the end of that episode when Lionel gets a hold of that security footage of Lex and Clark talking, and Lex is like, I know your secret. And Lionel's like, why didn't you show me this earlier?
I know.
That's so good. This isn't Lex centric, but I have to say, I wish the show had done more of this. The fact that you got to see a trio of returning meteor freaks teaming up against Clark. It's like, oh my God. I mean, they did this one time. One time. I mean, at least they did it the one time. But you look at something like this and it's like, oh man, because what I realized watching this is you have this shorthand now. You don't have to reintroduce these characters. And even still, they give you enough where you know, if you hadn't watched those earlier episodes, you get the gist of it. But you can just jump right in and just this idea, because all these meteor freaks he fights in these early seasons, what happens to them? Either he punches or throws them and they die, or they get carted away to Belle Reef. So it's like, well, okay, what happens to them once they're there? I wanted more of that, but I loved that setup.
I did too. I thought that was really cool. And it's something that we end up getting, like either like the Smallville walks so the Arrowverse could run, right? We get this in the Arrowverse, right? They learned, right? So again, there always has to be a first to do something. So you know, future generations learn.
Lance, I maybe in my heart I know this answer. The fact that you're one of the hosts of Always Hold On to Arrow, but yet I know your deep love of Smallville. I have me ask. Maybe I'm afraid to ask, but Smallville versus the Arrowverse. Where does your heart lie ultimately?
Good question. My heart says Smallville. My head says the Arrowverse.
Interesting.
I'll say that.
Okay. All right, we'll go with that.
Yeah, because I get like this. I can't help but look back at like Smallville is and watching Smallville is such a. I look back upon it with such fondness. It's a special time for me. And then as a result of that show, I have a best friend as a result of it. So like, I can't help but be thankful for the show and look upon my viewing of it and being involved with it and the time I've spent with it without fondness and gratitude.
All right. Fair enough. But it's such an interesting dilemma. I know this is more of a Clark-centric point, but it's such an interesting dilemma that Asylum puts Clark in, because Lex knows his secret. Clark knows Lex doesn't belong there. He knows that Lionel has been drugging him. Lionel has been using Claire Foster, Lex's psychiatrist, also from the comics, but she was Superman's psychiatrist. And Lex's security personnel. Lex has engineered all of this to drive Lex crazy, to discredit him, to get him into this asylum, to get his memory erased. Like, Clark knows all of this, but initially does not break him out. He does get to the point when he knows there's going to be this electroshock therapy where he does take that step, but then of course is stopped by our returning meteor freaks. But early in that episode, I feel like I don't know exactly what accounts for this. I think the Kent's counsel is a major factor. Jonathan is pretty adamant, like you can't break him out of a state institution.
Yes.
I have to imagine also the fact that Lex knows a secret plays a big role for both the Kents and for Clark. But it is a very interesting dilemma that the show puts Clark in.
No, I agree. And like, these are the type of, you know, moral dilemmas that you want to see Superman try to face, right? It's like, what decision are you going to make? And ultimately, the decision he makes is like, I'm going to save somebody, right? Regardless of what effects it'll have for me, like, and how it will affect me down the road. What is important is saving this person who is about to have something done to them that they do not deserve to happen to them. That is ultimately the choice he makes, which is the right decision. But at the same time, like, if he were going to preserve if he had, listened to Jonathan and been like, oh, I'm just going to, just only preserve the secret and only just be in self-preservation, would that be a good decision for, like, personally? I mean, you can argue that it is, but is it ultimately really the right decision? The right decision ultimately is always going to be helping somebody else and helping others. And that's what he does. And that's because that's what Clark Kent does. That is what Superman does.
Go back to that episode we started with, Nemesis, when Lex is trapped underground, and Chloe is essentially saying, like, maybe you leave me here. And Clark, of course, says no. And Chloe says, it's like, you don't get to choose who you save, not when you're Clark Kent. And that gets at the heart of this. Yeah. But there's that scene early on when Clark goes to visit Lex. It's the footage that Lionel will see later. But when Lex is saying, you got to get me out of here, and Clark says no, and Lex flips. And he's like, I'll never forgive you for this. And I remember at the time watching, I still have that memory of watching that scene in particular. And I mean, I guess deep down, I knew this genie would get put back in the bottle. I don't think I actually thought, oh, Lex is going to know the secret from now on. But just that kind of idea of, this is why Lex hates him. Because in his darkest hour, in his moment of need, Clark didn't help him when he could have. That's why. I remember it so stood out to me, especially at a point still early in the show. I mean, hell, even when we were deep in the show, we still didn't know exactly what the final thing was going to be. So I have that memory. I remember thinking about that at the time.
Yeah, it's a good one. And the thing is, like, it would have been cool if they would have, continued with a version of the show, or a version of them moving forward where he knows and Clark knows that he knows. I think that's interesting.
I do too.
Because at the end, because they still have like a code. There's an unusual code of honor where, like, they don't out each other about it. Like, it's like, and like, they don't bring it up, they don't acknowledge it, but they know, right? And they just move on. But like, it's something that's in the fore and background of their minds.
We'll talk more about this as we get deeper, but in their final scene in Arctic, after everything, as the fortress is crashing down around them, what is the last thing that Lex says to Clark? He says, I love you like a brother, but it has to end this way. I'm sorry. And even in the series finale, when they reunite, he's still putting his hands on Clark's shoulders and motivating him. There's something there. I'll have more to rant about when we get to the finale, but no, I'm with you. There's a path where maybe we could have gone down that road, but I do also want to mention, and we mentioned the caves earlier, introduced in season 2, these Kawachi caves, these loom pretty large, especially through the back half of season 2 and season 3. And you have Lex and Lionel jockeying for control of them, and Clark inexplicably mixed up and always kind of at the center of the action when it comes to the Kawachi caves.
Knows how to read them.
Yeah.
And nobody really questions it.
But the episode Talisman, late in season 3. I just bring this up because this was another moment that was always seared into my brain, and I rewatched, and I dug this episode. This is where you have the professor from the Kawachi tribe talking to Clark once again about him being Naman, this prophesied savior who's going to do battle with the friend turned enemy Sagith, and then the teaching assistant gets the blade that gives him the powers, and he thinks he's Naman. All that business, but all that to say, at the end of the episode, there's this very telling moment between Clark and Lex where Lex is like, I've been thinking about this prophecy, Clark. If there were a Naman, someone with that amount of power, you'd have to be pretty brave to stand up to him. He could take over the world. What if the real hero of the story is Sagith? And that's the note we end on. And it was just one of those things. Look, we've looked over the course of doing all of these episodes, we've looked at a lot of different motivations for Lex. Right? Why is he the way he is? Why does he hate Superman? Is it just jealousy? People used to look up to him and now they look up to Superman.
Mm-hmm.
Is it his abusive upbringing? Is it this notion that no one person should be entrusted with that level of power?
Mm-hmm.
I think
Kanye said that.
What?
That's a Kanye lyric.
All right.
No one man should have all that power. The clock's ticking. I just count the hours.
Fair enough. But, and over the course of Smallville, I think you kind of get all of those in some way, shape, or form over the course of Lex's arc. It, again, like we were saying before, I don't think it's any one thing, but this idea of Lex seeing himself as the hero.
Yes.
Very interesting. This is such a big picture question, but do you see that as a consistent through line for Lex over what we'll see in the seasons to come?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that informs him, building the teams, experimenting on people, trying to get, use the meteor rock or the kryptonite, I should say. I know what it is. To do things, to be prepared for whatever is coming, for the weird things that are happening, to make himself more invincible, to make himself as somebody that the world has to look to for strength, for leadership. Again, like making himself a modern day Alexander the Great.
I think overall I agree with that. And I think going back to that season 7 scene we were talking about where he explodes at Clark and he's like, these threats are real. It's like they are. I mean, we've seen that at the start of season 5. We have Brainiac's ship. We have these 2 Kryptonians tearing up the town looking for Kal-El. Brainiac. I mean, this is
exactly
real.
And they are real. And he's seen these things and he thinks that he is the only person capable of stopping them. And I think this season, in this episode in Talisman, I think this is where like that kind of clicks from. Is like, oh, like my destiny is not to run, to run Luthor Corp and do all this other stuff. My destiny is to be a leader. My destiny is to stop this threat that is coming. Right. And to be the person that the world looks to for strength. And the thing that will ultimately drive him insane is the fact that he is not that guy. The person that the world looks to is Superman when he thinks that it should be him.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, this is really, I guess we'll talk more about this when we get to Veritas in season 7, as Lex concludes, for the most part, his journey on the show. But I think this whole idea of Lex seeing himself as this hero, as this protector, as the savior of mankind, I think to psychoanalyze him again, it for him, it almost has to be that, because otherwise what has all of this been for? Right. Like he says, when we get to Arctic and their final showdown in the fortress, it's like, it's my birthright. Everything I've been through, all the pain, this guy has been through a lot, even before the meteor shower, but especially the meteor shower and the mark that left on him physically and emotionally. And this feeling of alienation, being picked on, all of it stemming from that moment. So it's like, it has to be something greater.
Yes. And you think, like, again, like somebody that comes from his world of privilege thinks that, like, if I've gone through all of this, right, and people who are in his Lex Luthor level of privilege don't go through anything, if we're being real. And so he thinks that his just reward at the end of all of, he's gone through, his crucible, if you will, is this, the elevated position that he seeks, and the power to wield whatever power he has in that position. That is what he feels is his reward. That is what he feels is his as he says, his birthright. It's his cause. It's his reason for living. It's its motivation factor. And you see this a lot with a lot of villains. Like, they go on this insane quest to do whatever. They think that the things that they've gone through, and they think the things that they are owed, like they are born to do a certain thing. But like, there's always somebody who's like, no, like, you're like, it's like, what you're thinking is not correct, because it's somebody else, and they can't fathom the fact that it's not them. They are narcissistic in that way, because they think everything revolves around them.
Absolutely. Now, we referenced this moment in Covenant, the season 3 finale, where Lionel leads Lex to this room, the Clark room, in the mansion, with all of Lex's investigations into Clark and the Kent family, all these unexplained things. And we've seen this over the course of the preceding seasons. I mean, even the fact after Martha survives her bout with the kryptonite fever in season 2, Lex pays for her medical records, right? Like, this has been an ongoing thing. And Clark discovers this. even though Lex had claimed he wasn't investigating Clark anymore.
Yeah.
Do you see this? Because this is, I guess, a question of when does the friendship between them truly break irreparably? Do you see it as, I guess, what is the moment that you really kind of pinpoint? Because I know they try to salvage it past this point, but it never really feels the same. Like this really feels like a major kind of line in the sand for them.
It's the major one because he'd said earlier that he was going to stop, right? That he was going to stop looking into it. And then it turns out that like he just doubled down, right? And not only was he, going after him, but he's looking into like his parents, right? And so that's like, no, like you can't do that. They do try to kind of salvage it, but then like just stuff just keeps happening where it's like he becomes even more and more, weary of him. And they're kind of cordial for a little bit. They have a brief period of that, but like it's still they're not tight like they used to be. That much is very clear. Like their association, the nature of their association definitely changes and shifts. Like they're not close. And the funny thing is like Clark still has like kind of unfettered access to the mansion, like even after all of this. And it's not just because like we know that he has access because it's like even all the times he barges into Luthor Mansion, nobody like the thing is he doesn't need to barge in. Like it's like he has a key, he has a passcode, like he has like all the like it just doesn't matter to him. It's so funny. Like with powers or not, he could have got in there. So but yeah, this is one of those points. We're going to talk about it, I'm sure. But like Lana is definitely is another strike against him, and it just doesn't. Yeah, like those are the kind of the big ones right there. But this first one, seeing the room and seeing all the resources and the effort put into doing all of that, it's just like it's like, nah, you can't be doing this, man. Like I might even if the secret was small and you found out that somebody would been doing all of that to try to figure out what it was that you were doing, it's just like this is out of line. I can't trust you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a major line in the sand for them. And it's funny though, we were talking about the access to the mansion. That was the thing I was struck by rewatching Shattered, where he knows Darius and the other guy by name, and obviously they're doing that in that specific episode because it's a plot point that the guards have been pulled into this plan, but. It did also shed some light. It's like, oh yeah, of course. Like he would know all the guards by name and they know him. And it's like, oh, hey, go on in, kid. This grown man. Go on in, kid. But yeah, that moment in Covenant, I mean, that, is such a standout. And yeah, that's putting ourselves in that position. I don't know how you really come back from that. And I love how when Lex finds Clark in the room, he's like, I know what you're thinking, but really this is about me. It's like, buddy, you've got like wall-to-wall photos of this kid in your room here. Kind of hard to walk that one back. And if season 4, Zach and I talked about the whole Stones arc, which I'll reiterate, I think was well-intentioned, but not well executed in terms of what they were trying to do with the mythology. But it's interesting because it was not, I mean, we talked about how season 3 was so Lex heavy. I mean, season 4, arguably the lightest Lex season of those first 7, right? He really, I feel like he was on the back burner for a lot with a couple of very notable exceptions.
Yeah, he was like, was Rosenbaum like involved in another project that year? Do we know?
I don't know. I mean, I've been following Talkville. I feel like he's more been complaining about like, where am I in this episode? So I feel like I don't know that it was that. I think it was more where the story was going that season. But obviously a major, probably the Lex standout for season 4 is this episode Onyx, where he's experimenting with kryptonite and superheats it, turns it into black kryptonite, and it splits him into good Lex and bad Lex. And again, you talk about searching for things from the show and what comes up first. The moment in the barn after he's shot Jonathan and he's like, you were right about me all along, Mr. Kent. I am the villain of the story. Iconic moment. I got maybe a little bit of a hot take here.
Okay.
I like Onyx a lot. It's a super fun episode, right? It's a great episode. Rosenbaum does a fantastic job. I think anytime you see the characters just truly unleashed, like Clark on Red Kryptonite, for example, Lana on Nicodemus, whatever it is, there's something, who could forget? There's some, shout out to her body double. There's something to be said for seeing the characters in that unfiltered light. But I don't know. I feel like people put a little too much weight on this for Lex because
it's the quote, man. Like, and the fact that you have the villain, arguably one of the greatest villains ever created, saying, "I am the villain of the story," like owning the fact that he is the villain, like full villain heel turn, like that's what it is. And it's the thesis statement, it's the exclamation point at the end of the paragraph. It's all of those things, right? It's it's the walk off homer. That is it for Lex Luthor, right? There's like, I am the villain of the story. It's like, yeah, this is me.
Right. And again, definitely something entertaining about that. But I guess I just feel relatively early in the episode, he tries to kill Chloe and Clark and later says, like, well, Lex has thought about this, which I mean, yes, I guess I could believe, but I don't. And in fairness, again, we are dealing with a Lex whose good part has been completely severed. Yet, when we get all the way to Descent in season 7, we see Lex in his mind extinguish the little Alexander, the good part within him. But even still, he doesn't become the Lex that we saw in Onyx after that point. So I don't know what I'm saying. I guess it's just that I feel like the Lex in Onyx, he was just so unhinged. Like you said, this heel turn, it was so over the top. I don't know. To me, it didn't feel like, oh, this is the bad Lex that we're going to get to in the future. It felt like a step beyond that.
A little bit, but I guess exaggerated because that was the bad part, right? But ultimately, like, people come to that just because it's just a fun, iconic moment for the show. Like, they just had to have the villain say the thing.
Yeah, no, in fairness. But also too, like, what does he want from Clark? He wants them to team up and rule the world. Which I don't know. Maybe that kind of answers our question of, what would happen if, if Lex had known, obviously exactly again, a different version of Lex, but still, yeah. So definitely a standout just to kind of see what he has inside, that hasn't been fully let out yet. So definitely a standout moment. I suspect transference will come up when we finish this event by counting down our top episodes of the show, but more so from the Lionel perspective, right? The fact that we get to see Lionel in Clark's body and all of that. But kind of on this note, I know we've been focusing primarily on Lex, and that is our main focus here. But Lionel, of course, has his own arc over the course of the show, and I think by the time you get to season 3, we're beyond just, this tough love, overbearing father. He's our primary antagonist in that 3rd season. And then that's a Lionel who's fighting for his freedom and his health and his life. Yes. Right. And that's clearly driving this very focused search for answers about the caves and about Clark. Everything he does to try to stop Lex's efforts to reveal what Lex had done to his parents. I will say, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm putting Lionel up for Father of the Year here, but I will say it's interesting. Like in Shattered and Asylum, he doesn't have Lex killed. He could have taken that. Yeah. I'm not saying this is a real high bar that he cleared here, but again, and I think a lot of this, the writing, but I feel like so much of this really was John Glover as Lionel, where even in his worst moments, right? Like he brought, there was this magnetic quality, and he played it with enough ambiguity where like, you never knew exactly where the character's heart truly lied. And so I feel like you do feel his pain in what he's putting Lex through, as horrific as it is, and you can't excuse it. But again, there was something there. And again, the fact that he didn't take the most extreme step, it doesn't say much, but it says something.
A little bit, but again, it proves that Lex was right? Like, he wouldn't let anything happen to him, right? Because he needs it. Because again, it's all about legacy, right? Like that's what they believe in. That's what powerful people believe in, right? To steal from Tywin Lannister, like that's what this is all about. And so that's very much cut from that cloth. And so that's definitely how they played it. They definitely kind of view this world as if they were, still part of like the ancient Greek Caesars. Like that's their outlook on the world, right? And so it's like, oh yes, my son, my sole heir. So like, regardless if I don't like him very much, like he has to be the next one because this name has to rule for generations, right? That's what they're thinking.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, jumping back to transference in season 4, Lionel does seem to turn over a new leaf after this transference. It seems it cured him of the disease that was killing him, and also seemed to set him on a new path. Although by the time we get to Onyx, Bad Lex has brought back kind of that true, more vicious version of Lionel, and he's back in his suits and he's dropped his charity. But as we segue from the end of season 4 into season 5, for both of them, but especially on the Lionel front, this is the part in the story where Lionel becomes Jor-El's oracle, his vessel, his emissary. He takes on this different role. And over the course of the next few seasons, I guess maybe an open question that we can try to answer either now or when we get to Lionel's ultimate demise here. But, to what extent Lionel becomes a true ally or not. I mean, I feel like over those subsequent seasons, after he learns Clark's secret, I think his intentions become good, but his means, the methods that he employs, remain very questionable.
Yes.
Is kind of how I look at it. How do you feel about Lionel, especially over those final few seasons?
I think that's the best way to kind of to describe it, for sure. And I think that his one tether, the carrot in front of him, in a lot of ways, humorously enough, is Martha. Like, he has this weird crush on Martha. So that's kind of driving some of his actions, which is funny to think about, but like, it's true for a lot of other characters, how like some of their actions and like what the things that they do is over their feelings towards a woman in their life, like Lex.
Yeah, no, I know. And I know that's fair. And with Lionel, like I say, though, his means, and this is really kind of pulling together a few seasons here, but the fact that he shows up on election night to the barn and confronts Jonathan with this proof that he has about Clark that ultimately drives Jonathan to this fatal heart attack. In season 6, blackmailing Lana into marrying Lex. Ultimately, as we find out, to protect Clark because he wants information about the wraith that Lex is tracking. And then in season 7, having Clark abducted and placed in this kryptonite cage to protect him from Veritas. It's like, again, I think with Lionel, as we move forward, I think, again, ultimately he is trying to protect Clark, but he's still Lionel Luthor. His fundamental nature hasn't changed, or at least hasn't fully changed. And so I feel like that's how you see that manifest in terms of that behavior. So he remains an enigma, I think, pretty much through the end.
Yeah, no, again, similar with Lex, like that their true nature is what ultimately, wins over anything else that has happened to them. Like, they've had these experiences and these interactions with all these different people with values completely different from them, and they have these interactions with people who are genuine and do not see and view the world the way that they do, and they still end up doing the Luthor way.
There's one last bit in season 4 before we get to Lex's kind of final few seasons here. In the episode Jinx, our Mixus Pitalik episode, we'll talk more about that when we do our villains episode, but it ends with Lex taking Mikhail to level 33.1.
Yeah.
So this is another big thing when we look at kind of the investigations and the projects of Lex across the series. In experimenting with meteor rocks in season 1, and then getting into the caves in seasons 2 and 3, the stones in season 4, the alien ship in season 5, the super soldier program in season 6,
keep going,
the project Scion, and with the black liquid from Brainiac in season 7, and then also in season 7, Project Gemini with the cloning that leads him to resurrect his brother Julian in the form of Great Gabriel. So he has all of these investigations and experiments, but I feel like the most consistent through line, though, it's so much in the background, but is this idea of level 33.1 of rounding up and experimenting on the meteor freaks. And we really only get a few mentions and glimpses of it. It's so funny to me that, one of the worst episodes from season 6, Subterranean, has like one of the most memorable and badass endings of any episode of Lex. You know what I'm talking about, right? As Lex is walking through the hallway set to what's the song again?
It's the
Prelude 1221.
That one.
But it's such a great moment. I guess what is my question here? When we talk about what ifs, and especially of past Meteor Freaks coming back, it's hard not to feel like there was a missed opportunity here in not seeing Lex's 33.1 project really come to fruition. I feel like this could have been something. No,
it could have been something. I agree. Again, like we see this more with the Arrowverse than we do here. I think there was more of a want to in the era of the Arrowverse rather than the era of Smallville. Because again, remember, this is still, no tights, no flights, right? They're not gonna they weren't gonna embrace any of that type of stuff. It was a different era, different time, different thought process. So I think they would nowadays. They'd have to do a whole thing with it, but they didn't then.
Yeah, I like I said, there was something there. I can't help but wish we had seen that really come to fruition. But in any event, if the end of Covenant, or if Covenant at the end of season 3 is again a major break in the Clark-Lex dynamic, I feel like Mortal at the beginning of season 5, episode 2, that's it. Where Clark is powerless at this point in the season, and Lex sends this trio of Meteor Freaks to test him essentially. And Clark discovers this and confronts Lex at the mansion at the end of the episode. I mean, this is far and away one of my all-time favorite Clark moments and one of my all-time favorite Clark-Lex scenes. It is fantastic.
It really is. And again, this is another instance of Clark being depowered at the right time to have, to win the argument, to have the moral high ground, and to have his anger at Lex completely justified without fault.
It is like this was all a test, and you put Lana and my family in danger. And he's, he keeps punching Lex as this is happening. And he's like, I tried to move forward, but you're too obsessed with the past and with me. He's like, but I'm different now, and I'm done playing games. You want to test me? Do it yourself, you coward. And that's when Lex gets a blow in, and of course Clark bleeds, and he's like, "You satisfied?" And
exactly.
And then Clark goes off and bangs Lana. It's like, this guy, man, what a badass! This was
hey, what a great day for Clark.
I love when he sees Lana, and she's like, "What happened to you?" He's like, "I said goodbye to an old friend." And that's how he leaves it. Did she not have any other questions? I know she says, "Have you ever heard of a handshake?" But maybe afterwards, maybe that was the pillow talk. It's like, so like, who'd you hit?
well, we know Lana wants the answers to questions too. So
yeah, I know exactly. I know weirdly that one she let go pretty quickly. It's like, what happened to you? I said goodbye to an old friend. Okay. Well, I lit some candles. Yeah, I lit some candles and Coldplay's on. So like, but that's one of my favorite scenes between the two of them. And I think at that point, it's funny, in rewatching a lot of episodes, I guess I had kind of forgotten they still have a good amount of interaction.
They do.
Like the Exposed episode where Jonathan's old buddy from Dukes of Hazzard comes into town, the senator, and Clark needs information on that club. He goes to, so it's not that they have no interaction, but it's a very different dynamic. That friendship is not what it was. And that's definitely a huge moment in their what was their friendship. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts available via a shared universe network. I guess that essentially brings us to Lexmas.
Okay.
Which I rewatched last night. Man, it was so good. It was
Everybody loves this
so
episode. It's a
good.
great
I
episode.
mean, Lexmas is so good.
Mm-hmm.
Just to see, for Lex to see, right? He's shot and he has this visitation with the spirit of his mother. It reminded me a lot of whatever happened to the Caped Crusader, just kind of in that respect of Batman teetering on the edge and seeing Martha. But Lillian shows him this life that he could have, where he's married to Lana. They have one kid, another on the way. He's friends with Clark again. They're on a budget. He doesn't have the fortune or the power. He gave all of that up, but he has happiness. He has love. He's never been happier. And then Lana encounters medical complications after she gives birth to their daughter. And in desperation, Lex goes to Lionel, who refuses to help because Lex had walked away from his father and that life.
Yes.
And upon waking, Lex's takeaway is he wants it all. Right.
Yes.
I want it all. He wants the money. He wants the power. Well, he also wants Lana. He wants to pursue this life. And we'll see him over these next couple of seasons take the steps to try to get there.
Yes.
But it really is a seminal moment in Lex's arc where he has this near-death experience, this look at what he could have, and he just takes the wrong lesson from it.
Yeah. Like instead of the thing is like, I mentioned off the top in the show, like the one thing that he wants is to be loved, right? And so he sees this life he could have where he has that, the one thing that he wants. But his takeaway is, no, I want everything. And that is a villain's mindset, right? Like, and again, that is a conqueror's mindset. Again, like keep going back to the Alexander the Great thing, but it's the narrative that drives him. He's named after the guy, for God's sake. So I mean, that's what's going on here. It's what's driving him.
It is. In fairness to Lex, though, I mean, yes, I guess ideally, and maybe if it had been Clark, the takeaway would have been, even though this is pain beyond calculation, it was still worth it to have this good, pure love, and it was worth it, essentially, to give up all of that, even if I lost it. But I think Lex's takeaway, even if it is quote unquote wrong and the villain's choice, I there is something to it where it's like, no, he after what he's seen, right? He only wasn't able to save her because he didn't have the resources that he used to. So he's going to ensure that he's never in that kind of position.
Yeah, but what he doesn't see though is to do what it needs to be done to ensure that he has those things. He does not do the things that would give him the love that he wants. He doesn't understand that. And as somebody who is looking for love and does not understand how to do it, he doesn't understand that like those resources and stuff doesn't matter. And so that's the disconnect.
Yeah. And this is all set against the backdrop of Jonathan and Lex running for state senate, which I got to say real quick, I in our earlier Superboy coverage, I finally read that early 80s New Adventures of Superboy comic book series. And there's this subplot that they introduce in the final issues before the book is canceled and it's never resolved, but of Jonathan running for city council. And it's not against Lex, but I remember reading that. I'm like, what the heck? Like, there is some basis for all of this stuff. I don't think that in any way directly impacted or influenced what Smallville did, but it was just funny. Anytime I feel like we see these connection points, intended or otherwise, it's always kind of funny and interesting. But I also have to say, even though the other big thing for Lex going on in this season was the ship, the alien ship, there's something like refreshingly quaint and down to earth about a state senate race. I kind of like the more grounded, real world stakes of something like that.
Yeah, well, and the other part about that is that's another example of Lex trying to be loved. Like if you win an election, that means that people like you, they trust you, they want you to they want to be inspired by you. They want you to help them with things. And then they're looking to you because you are the leader. You're the one who can provide them with things. So, and again, like he loses, right? That is another thing that is taken from him that he can't have. And it's a huge blow for him, which is what causes him to drink in the first place in that episode. Like not only the fact that he lost, but like the fact that like what it represents, what he would lost. And that is more why he's upset. It's not the loss itself, it's the loss of everything else that goes with it.
And speaking of that episode, Reckoning, our mutual friend, Zach, we talked about this a long time ago when we did our What If episode, but I guess I'll just pose this to you, kind of what we had talked about way back when. Is there something to that first half of Reckoning where before Clark redoes the day, where he shares his secret with Lana, she accepts his proposal, she goes over to a drunken Lex's place after Lex loses the election, and he realizes she knows Clark's secret. She doesn't give anything away, but he can just tell she knows.
Yeah.
And he goes after her, and in this chase, she's killed in this car accident, and Clark speeds up. Lex sees.
I know. The visual of it is so good. It's such a good scene because he sees it. And you're like, and like everything clicks in his mind. It's like, oh my God, this is what I've been searching for.
Yeah. So Lex sees Clark use his abilities. That clicks into place. And Clark arrives to see his fiance, who he's just about to embark on this life with, who he's loved forever, dead because of an accident ultimately caused by Lex. Is there any part of you that's like, oh, I would have liked to have seen that play out, whether it was just for the rest of one episode and then we got the redo, or if we had never had a redo? Is there a version of the story where you think that's the path for Clark and Lex? Like that's the dividing line between them because of those?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Because there's a world where that there is not a second half to that episode. Like it just ends there, right? And then and this was the 5th season, so we didn't know if they were going to end. But like you could very well see, it's like, oh well, this is it. This is why they became enemies. He killed the woman that he loves, and like she's out of the picture, so he goes off with Lois, and then they do everything in their power to stop him as journalists and all that other type of stuff. There's a world where that's a thing.
I know. I can't help but shake that. I think it would have been interesting to see something like that play out. But either way, again, certainly another standout. And then the last thing I guess I want to say about season 5 here is
that you've opened a portal to Zod.
Yeah. Well, on that note, when Lex has powers, as Brainiac is preparing him to be inhabited by Zod, but Lex is still in command of his body at this point, and he has that showdown with Clark in the barn.
Yeah.
They have, again, a rare, at this point in the show, heart to heart about their friendship. And Clark says, I think the question is, like, why did you fight to save our friendship for all those years? Or something to that effect. And Lex says, because I wanted everything you had. Right. And going back to what you were saying before about that jealousy. And at this point in the series, Lex and Lana have recently begun embarking upon a romantic relationship. And Lex says, at least I walked away with the one thing you cared about the most. And I guess we've said our piece about Lex in those early seasons, but that adds kind of another layer to it when you hear something like that of like, oh, well, so again, going back to that initial question, were they ever really friends? Or was it really just that Lex wanted the inconspicuous life? He wanted the parents who adored him. He wanted the girl next door who loved him. Debatable, I guess.
Debatable, but I think both are true. I think they, again, early on, I think they actually were for a little bit. And then over time, as weird things happen in Smallville, and as he does stuff, Lionel does stuff, everybody's doing stuff, weird stuff is happening. The distrust grows, the paranoia grows, all the stuff that they all go through. It just becomes like, well, like, yeah, the friendship is nice, but what I really want is this over here. That's what I actually want. And then it's just like, well, if I can't have that, so I'm gonna get this. If I can't have that. And so again, I think it was initially, and then over time, the friendship withered and it turned into something else for him.
Wither, also the title of a season 6 episode.
Well, this is all intentional.
And
I know what I'm doing.
You know what you're doing. Well, and speaking of season 6, so we in our last episode, we did talk about the ships of the show, including Lexana. But let me just ask you generally your feelings about that pairing, and I guess maybe the most important question: were Lex's feelings for Lana true and genuine, or was it just that he wanted something that Clark had? Where do you draw that line?
Well, I don't think his feelings for Lana were true. I think it was projections, and it was something that he he didn't want it for like any pure reasons, obviously, but it was more of a power thing. He wanted to get her because he thought he could, and that he should, and that it would annoy Clark. That was the thing. It was something that I think he also knew was inappropriate the entire time, and something that taboo was something that he gravitated towards. But yeah, I think just the power that he could do it and get away with it, I think was more of a driving factor and something enticing to him than her as a character or as a person. I don't think he cared for that at all. I think he could care less. Based on who he was at that particular point in the show, it's just like, yeah, like I'm just going to do this because I can, and I want to kind of stick it to Clark. Again, that's a pretty nefarious thing to do. And that's just his part of that. The other part of that is Lana has a terrible taste in dudes over the course of the show. So it's not like she's an innocent in this either. But like that whole pairing was not good.
It's tough. It's tough to take as an audience member, I think, just as it was for Clark.
Yeah.
I guess I'll speak up a little bit for Lex here. Well, let me also say, just big picture, and I talked with Craig about this last week, where the setup of all of this was weird or questionable, yeah. I think, because
problematic.
The fact that the fact that the show knew they were ultimately building towards this, yet again, due to the ages of the characters, it wasn't really something they could access for a long time. Yet. I don't even go back to season 1 when Lana was under the influence of Nicodemus and she's putting the moves on Lex, and it's like he stops it, but I don't know. Maybe he could have done a little bit faster. Yeah. And then going back to Onyx, what's the first thing Lex does when he's bad Lex? He goes to Lana's apartment and puts the moves on her. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of season 4, when they're out by the helicopter, he's like, "You mean more to me than you know." And then, of course, the Lexmas business, that's his dream. That's his vision of a happy life, is being with her. And then, of course, swoops in immediately after Clark and Lana have broken up, when she's clearly hurting and on the rebound. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I don't know. I chalk this up to, I think, again, it's hard to go so far as to say Lex's feelings are genuine, because I think this points to what we've been getting at and what Lana will say to him at the end of the season: "You're incapable of love." So I don't know that he really is capable of loving her, but I think if he were, I think it were genuine. Like I don't think his intentions with her were so sinister. I think he wanted, I think he wanted to love her, but I just don't know that he really could.
I think he knew that she would be, I guess, easy access for him, because he, as a broken person, recognized that she was too. Right. And so I think there was probably a connection on that level. But at the same time, Lex, with, his Luthorness, knew that was somebody who could manipulate and control. Ultimately, it's about power with him. And he had a power over her for a time. And as a result, had power over Clark.
True. And he faked a pregnancy.
Yeah.
And that's not even the worst of it, because we get to the end of season 6 and Lex hits her. He hits Lana. Now, again, you talk about these big tentpole moments. We've already talked about them. I won't rattle them off again. But I think just as the mortal moment between Clark and Lex, similarly with Lex and Lana at the end of, or during Phantom there, where they're having that scene in the office, and she's telling him that she's leaving. And I've talked about this before in other episodes. It so stood out to me because there's that moment where Lex starts to leave, which we've seen how many times? Has there been a conversation between two people in the mansion and then one of them walks away?
Yeah.
But this time he stops and he closes the doors. And it's such a chilling moment. And he says, "It's about Clark, isn't it?" And she's like, "He means more to me than you ever will." And at this point, she knows Clark's secret. He's confessed about Krypton. They're in it together. And he backhands her. He physically hits her. I mean, it's again a very ugly moment for the character. And I guess I don't even know how to phrase this question, but it's like, what? We've talked a lot about the friendship and when that fully breaks. What do you think is the point of no return for Lex in terms of his descent into villainy? Like, what what is the point where it's like, no, that's kind of, at this point, there's really no going back for him.
Faking a pregnancy. Honestly, like earlier when he kills, like the murder he commits, the experimenting on other human beings. Like, I mean, like he's crossed this line multiple times. So it's not like there is it's like, okay, now he's evil now. It's like he's been evil for a while, and he's done evil acts for a while now. But this is just adding. It's just more red in his ledger. That's all it is.
Yeah. I know the faking the pregnancy. It's I think that to me the tragedy of one of the tragedies of Lex is that yes, Lana was hurting when they embarked upon this relationship, but I think Lana at the beginning, at least like early season 6-ish, her feelings for Lex were genuine, regardless of where they started. I mean, when you look at the other women in his life. Mm-hmm. The Desiree, the Victoria, the Helen Rice, like what Lana was demonstrating towards Lex was something different, I think, than he had seen before.
Yeah.
Yet, right, he's again incapable of, I guess, receiving that and just accepting it. There's this desperation. There's this calling to try to control, right, yeah. And that leads him to fake this pregnancy. But like the tragedy is like this was the one time where you actually maybe could have had. You could have had someone, but of course, as we know, Lana was getting ready to leave him anyway, before she knew about the fake pregnancy. So I don't know. I guess it maybe wouldn't have made a difference in the end, but it's just like, I guess my point is this was the one person where, hey, you actually could have, there could have been something here, but he just wasn't capable of it.
Again, that Luthor nature took over.
Very much so.
Every time.
Yeah. I guess we get into Lex's final season on the show, season 7, before Michael Rosenbaum departs. And I had mentioned that episode, Fracture, where Clark goes into Lex's mind. And we talked about some of those flashbacks. And I guess most notably, this idea that there's still a good part of Lex inside. And it's a really standout scene, I think, towards the end where Clark has this farewell with the good part of Lex with Alexander. And he's like, I know you're still in here. Like, I'll keep fighting for you. You keep fighting. So just, again, this idea of Clark continuing to look for the good to whatever extent he can. But
yeah,
the Veritas arc, because this really brings Lex's journey on the show to a close and represents this massive retcon where we have this revelation pretty deep into season 7 that all along the Luthors, the Queens, the Teagues, and the Swans were part of this cabal to track the arrival.
There's that word again. Kevin and I had a real fun time with that word during Arrow in season 6 because they used that with Caden James, and we were just like, that's how all the episode descriptions would use. It's like, but nobody ever used it on the show to describe it, and so we had a lot of fun with that. So that is a fun word. Cabal, or
we could say secret society, but that they were tracking the arrival of this traveler from the stars. And they were going to try to protect him, but that also there was this means of controlling the traveler that Virgil Swan was aware of and had hidden, and all of this business. Like Zach and I talked about when we looked at the overall kind of arcs and mythology of the show, it's really hard to square the Lionel who was anticipating a traveler from the very beginning. And in fact, that's why he was in Smallville in the first place, according to season 7. It's hard to square that with the Lionel we had seen in previous seasons who, yes, was searching for answers, but ostensibly, like if he had known there was a traveler coming, I feel like that would have colored a lot of those earlier season proceedings very differently.
Very much.
So how do you feel about the Veritas arc overall?
It's dumb. It was
all right.
That's my short and succinct answer for that. It was dumb. It gives us a good laugh now, but it's just like, what are y'all doing? Because again, like as you said, it's like we've been watching this whole time. There's no way. Like, there's no way. You just tried to make this work, and it's clearly not working. You're trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and this is not working for you.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't disagree. I think ultimately, in terms of Lionel, in terms of the show, and just its own continuity, it's kind of hard to get totally on board with, even though I do like I like the idea of it. Again, if this had been seeded throughout the series, I think it could have been something, although I feel like it would have collapsed under its own weight at a certain point. I feel like it would have gotten way too convoluted.
If it were something else, I think would have been different. Because I buy those families being in some weird secret society. I buy that 100%. But not of them knowing that there was a traveler going to be coming to Smallville of all places, and do all the I don't buy that. But if it was something else that could have been Superman related or adjacent, I think that would have been neat. That would have been kind of cool. And maybe tied to something like to a villain or something, like who knows. But them being or just have them be in a secret society and they're running Metropolis or something like that. Something, I don't know, something else. I would have bought that, but not not them anticipating the arrival of Clark or somebody from the stars. I don't buy that, and it doesn't work for what they were trying to do with the show, because again, Clark is the one who comes to them, and they've already had a retcon earlier where with 61 with Relic, where it's just the Kents just shot an arrow, pinpointed it at to Smallville, Kansas in particular, and it was just no, that's the cool thing about this is the chance. It's the Moses narrative. You don't know where he's gonna go, right? And so that's what makes it what it is. And his arrival is what triggers a lot of the events that unfold that you couldn't have calculated. That's what makes it cool. If they knew all along, well, that's just kind of dumb. That means that they all know, and it's just well, what's the point of everything?
I agree. It was just too specific. I think there was a way they could have pulled it back a little bit if it had just been more ambiguous, or their cabal had been about something a little bit there. I think there's something to it. All that being said, from Lex's perspective, I actually do like it, because it's this idea, I think for him, and I think he even says at one point to his assistant or one of the other characters, that it's he finally has a name for this kind of for the larger questions that have plagued him. And I think for Lex, it kind of ties a lot together.
It gives him a solvable mystery finally.
Yes.
Right. And so there is some satisfaction for him that he can get some answers. But at the same time, it's what are we doing?
I know maybe it's a hat on a hat at a certain point, but just for Lex, this notion of, again, why he was in Smallville in the first place. And then again, the symbols on the cave, the stones, all of this stuff that he's experienced, that there was sort of this larger purpose. And like you said, this solvable mystery for him. Again, I think looking at it through the lens of Lex's journey is probably the most I've enjoyed the Veritas arc so far. So I'll take that for what it is. Cause otherwise,
fair enough.
Yeah, I do kind of wrestle with it, but on the road to that final confrontation with Clark in the fortress at the end of season 7, Lex does what I think we had all been waiting for across the series. What we thought might happen at the end of season 1 during the tornado. He kills Lionel at the start of the episode Descent by throwing him out of the top of the Luthor Court building. Yeah. I was raised in your shadow. Now you're going to die in mine. They won't even remember your name. Right? The question that so many of us had over the years is well, Lionel Luthor, we never heard of Lionel Luthor. Yep. And it's there you go. What do you want to say about that scene, man? It was such a standout.
It is a standout. And honestly, that was his final trial before becoming evil Lex, right? That's what it is. There are lots of moments along the way that the different checkpoints he was reaching. That was he can now go to his final form. He could finally get the final trial. It was passed at that point. That's what that represents.
Lex had his own trials to go through, just as Clark did in all of this. And unfortunately, Lex just couldn't overcome. But no. I've been referencing this scene between Clark and Lex in the mansion when Clark goes to confront Lex because Jimmy and Lois have uncovered photographic evidence that someone, presumably Lex, had actually pushed Lionel out the window, that it wasn't a suicide as Lex had claimed. And I know we're building towards this final scene in Arctic, but I think that scene between them in Descent, that's the showdown scene for me, right?
That's a good one. It's a good one. And because a lot of the things that we had wanted to see and hear are said and seen and heard there. Right. So it's we're getting as an audience, we're getting that we're finally going to do this,
I know when Lex brings up Jonathan,
Yes.
right? And essentially this whole idea of like, how hard was it to raise the perfect son, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why was Jonathan Kent always so stressed? Could it have been that difficult? I wonder what kind of stress that put on his heart. But Clark, and again, Zach and I talked about this, the dropout years period, tough time for Clark. And we didn't have that confident, assertive Clark, but he stood up for himself in this scene, which I liked a lot. And he's like, are you blaming me for my father's death? Are you? One of us is guilty here, and it's not me. Oh, it was great.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, this is what we wanted to see. Like, we get like this, and this only can come about when the characters know each other as intimately as they do. Right. And this is when we get to the good stuff, right? Because they could say, these things that they know will hurt and trigger and like really hit deep, because they know exactly what to say because they know each other so well. So that's why this is the good drama. This is the cinema that we're talking about here.
It is. And a very important piece when Lex says, he's like, how is it that after pleading with my father for years to show me any compassion, he turns to you with open arms? Now, what would a worldly billionaire have in common with a simple farm boy? Mm-hmm. And Clark is like, well, I guess he just knew he could trust me. Right. And then that leads him into the whole thing about Jonathan. But it's this whole other aspect. We talked about reasons why Lex ends up the way he is, on top of everything else, on top of the fact that Clark is clearly hiding something from him. And that's one of the other things in rewatching so many episodes from across the series that, again, I was just kind of struck by. I guess I always knew, but I hadn't really thought about it. It's just how often the other characters acknowledge the fact that Clark is clearly keeping something. So you understand that frustration growing within Lex, but then Lex sees over the course of this series, clearly the Kents are in it from the beginning, like the Kent cabal, your favorite word, right? But also when Lex rescues Pete from the FBI agent at the end of season 3, and Lex says, like, I could see why Clark confided in you. You're a good friend. Right?
Yeah.
He knows Pete knows something. Clearly he knows Chloe knows at a certain point in the show. The fact that Lionel now has this relationship with him. Obviously the day got undone, but when Lex realizes in the first part of Reckoning, that Lana knows. Knows. Person after person. Clark is confiding in, and never Lex.
Never him.
So.
Yep. And the funny thing is, it's like, so I'm part of it on some level. Like, Lex has to know, it's just like, well, like, you just got here. Some of these other people like have been in his life earlier. So he's going to have some of those bonds have already been forged, and they're tighter and deeper than the one that you just had. Like, you just got here, and y'all were cool, but like, Pete was there for day one. Chloe was there day one. Lana, like, he's loved her like his whole life. So when he could tell her, and it was pertinent for him to do so to keep their relationship going, so he could be with her, he did tell her. Again, Lex is low on the totem pole, even though they had built up a good friendship for a little bit. Like, but again, it's the most recent one. Like, you got to get in line.
Yeah, fair.
There's a hierarchy.
The final scene of Descent, when they're both standing face to face over Lionel's grave at the funeral that Lex has closed to the public. I mean, is that not the perfect final shot?
It's good.
Final moment between the two of them. It's not the last one that we'll get, but I mean, had that been it, I feel like, all right, we're cooking.
If the show would have ended, those have been like, yeah, okay, y'all did it, Smallville, way to go.
But of course, like we said, that's not the end, and we do eventually get to Arctic, the season 7 finale, Michael Rosenbaum's final episode as a series regular. And at the climax of the episode, Lex, we have numerous steps. This Veritas thing went on for a while. We had the safety deposit box in Zurich, and then we had the churches and the clock and all this stuff.
It's a lot of it's A to B to C. Like, it's a lot of steps.
I'll be perfectly honest. I rewatched Traveler and Veritas and Descent, and I'm like, all right, this is good. And I had already rewatched Apocalypse. I was not going to do Sleeper. And then I was like, Quest and Arctic. I'm like, I just remember feeling like we were just inserting steps to get to episode 20 here. So,
yes.
So I jumped to the final scene of season 7 when Lex has arrived at the fortress with this orb that allegedly is going to allow him to control the Traveler. And then Clark speeds in. And at long last, they have a conversation without the secret between them.
Yeah, they just talk plainly.
And what was your reaction to this final scene between them, which, as far as we knew at the time, was going to be the last time we saw the two of them interact on screen on Smallville. Right? Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, what was your read on that scene between them? Did it give you what you had wanted after 7 years of buildup?
Sort of. And I think mostly because I think I understood that this is what we were going to get. I didn't think that we were going to get what we like a final scene after this between them in a season finale. I didn't think that was going to be a thing. Especially when we heard that he wasn't coming back for certain things and he was just going to be done because he was going to be done. So I was like, well, I guess if this is how we're going to go, this is what we're getting. So I'll be prepared to enjoy this for what it was. That's kind of my take on it on the Arctic scene.
All right. I think overall you had a better perspective. You got more out of it. I guess I've warmed to it more over time. Mm-hmm. But it always...
and also the fact that we have what we have in the finale kind of helps understand and kind of justify being okay with the season 7 thing, even though because I guess initial reaction I was like, well, this is it, this is all we're gonna get. That was the reaction, but then of course rewatching it as you know, when I rewatched the season, it's like, well, I guess that wasn't that bad, and then we move on, and then it's like, oh, we are gonna get something later. Okay, cool. When it actually does happen. So I think I'm kind of speaking from the eyes of of somebody living in 2024 as opposed to during when season 7 was airing.
Fair. Yes, I think the first finale scene that Lex is in, we'll get to the second one, softens the blow. And also, again, rewatching Descent, I think Descent gave me so much of what I wanted that maybe that takes a little bit of the pressure off of that Arctic scene. Okay. That scene in the back, and it's a relatively long scene for the show, which I liked because it gave them the space to have this conversation. Yeah. But Lex reiterates something that I quoted before, that he says numerous times, this whole idea of you turned your back on me. Mm-hmm. He says it in Nemesis. He says it in Descent. He says it again here. We actually skipped over Lex ordering the murder of his cloned brother, Julian. If I'm not mistaken, I think he says that to Grant at some point in that episode too, when Grant starts palling around with Lionel, you turned your, but something... All to say, you don't turn your back on Lex. It clearly sets him off.
Yes. He does not handle betrayal very
well. No. Well, speaking of murders, he also has Patricia Swan killed. I mean, as we're getting deep into season 7, he's just killing and having people killed.
Yeah, he's just killing people.
Willy-nilly, yeah. But this scene between them in Arctic, again, like I said before, it talks about how you never trusted me. I could have helped you. But... I guess the thing that always rubbed me the wrong way about this scene was when he says to Clark, you pose as a mild-mannered farm boy, but secretly you're a strange visitor plotting our demise.
He's believing the worst in the hype. You go back to Talisman, right? He's going back. He's like, oh, well, this person from the stars is not he is here to destroy and conquer. I'm going to save, but by him saying save, that really means he's actually going to conquer, right? And it's very, and he is believing the possible worst and fears that people have is oh, well, this person's not one of us. Well, they're not one of us. That means they're 100% dangerous and they're doing all these nefarious things. And they try to use that as a way to scare others into believing that some of those people are the worst, and then that can justify them doing the terrible actions that they are doing. Am I talking about comic books? Am I talking about real life? Who knows?
No, I hear you. Maybe it was just the verbiage. Had he articulated it more in the realm of what we've experienced from Lex before, just more of this notion of you can't be trusted with this power. Yeah. It probably just would have sat a little bit better with me. Because there was a more of an unhinged quality to the character. But at the same time, everything was so heightened. And again, when Lex starts talking about my birthright and this is what all the pain was for, you feel for the character, everything that he's gone through, and it had to all mean something. It had to all be for something. And in his mind, this is it. He's saving the world from this traveler by taking control, usurping the traveler's destiny in this moment here. And the fact, though, that it ends with, I love you like a brother, but it has to end this way. I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean, that to me, I guess, is the secret sauce of this dynamic across the series, including in the finale, where it's everything they've been through, but Clark is still the guy who saved him from the bridge. Lex is still the guy who pulled him down from that scarecrow post. I don't know. There's something there between them, and I like that. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show, too. This podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our Daily Planet Bullpen tier, available for $1 a month or $10 for the year. Members at this level are the first to know about upcoming coverage and get to submit a comment or question to be read during the episode. Sign up today, and thank you to all patrons. And at that point, the fortress collapses on the two of them, and for all we know, we'll never see Michael Rosenbaum's Lex again. And we then enter this whole other era of the show that we've talked about here. I guess, let me just ask you a big picture question that'll kind of launch us into the finale. The way the show handled the character of Lex after Rosenbaum left, specifically in season 8, how did you feel about it?
So season 8 and moving forward, but especially season 8, like you could tell that there was a big hole left in the show. Because like when you remove Lex Luthor, the primary antagonist from your thing, who's been there and been a presence for at this point 7 years, and you're still continuing the show is going to feel and look different without him. They did their best to try to be creative, but then ultimately just ended up having him killed. And then, but then we get the reveal later that like he is still his ultimate opponent, and then somehow Lex Luthor returns. And so yeah, like all the cloning and like the missing pieces and all that other stuff. It was very comic booky. They were kind of holding out hope to see that he would still come back maybe and do something, but nah, it wasn't that. It wasn't going to happen. It was very obvious. They tried their best, but it just didn't work out.
Yeah, I will forever have some frustration with the show for how it ended Lex's journey in season 7, because at that point, either they knew he wasn't coming back, or at least they weren't sure if he was coming back. And so to end it in that way, honestly, I do think was irresponsible. I think that there was a way they could have ended that where it's like, okay, the pieces are in place enough that if we don't see him again, we kind of know how they'll link up again down the line as adversaries. Again, like I said, had it just ended with Descent and then Lex went off to travel the world or something, you would have been like, okay, like I kind of get that.
And they meet later in life. Yeah, that would have been cool.
So I do think it was irresponsible. And I think they furthered that in season 8 by using the body double. We had this moment at the end of Bride where you see that someone's been watching all the video footage, and you see the bald head from behind, and he's in the chair, and he's got all the wires and everything. And at the time, it's like, oh my God, like he's going to come back. Like they're teasing it, right? And clearly, again, I think the intention was that whether Rosenbaum returned in physical form or at least did a voice, like that he would have, they were building towards something. But they were writing checks that they just could never cash. And so you get to Requiem, and we're left with body double Lex, whose voice is coming through this device, right? This breathing apparatus. And it's the best that they could do at that point, but they could have set themselves up. They could have put themselves in a better position. And that's my problem. And yes, that Lex gets blown up. Oliver Queen kills him in that Requiem episode. I was convinced all through season 8, all through season 9, all through season 10, we were going to find out that the season 8 Lex in the chair with the wires, with the breathing apparatus, that Lex was a clone. I was like, that's not the real Lex. And then the real Lex would show up at the very end. Like, that's kind of what I always assumed.
Okay.
Not the way the show went. I mean, as it turned out, according to the lore of Smallville, that was the real Lex, who was badly injured after the fortress collapsed and who got blown up and killed by Oliver Queen in season 8.
What a sentence.
Who is then resurrected by Darkseid in the series finale. And yes, along the way, in season 10 in particular, we had clones. We had the older clone, we had the young clone, who then became Connor Kent. We had Lex clones running around. But in the end, it's Lex Prime, Lex Zero, whatever they designated him, who is resurrected after all of that, which All right. It got us back to Lex. I mean, I do still wonder what they would have done had Rosenbaum not returned. I don't know if they just would have had a clone. They would have had a clone and that would have been it. Or if it would have been, here's what they could have done. They could have done in the series finale. There's that moment where Lex has been resurrected and he shoots up. Right. And we see Rosenbaum, he was back, but we could have just done something where you see the back of his head. And then in that season 7 flash forward where Lex is president, they had footage of Rosenbaum in his white suit. They could have just recycled footage.
Yeah.
So they could have still basically done the same thing where he's awake and then we see the president in the maybe they would have just done something like that.
Maybe that would have been cool.
I don't know. Because they, as you said, when you get that Dr. Fate discussion with Clark about even though he is your ultimate opponent, you will triumph over Lex Luthor. It's like Lex is dead. And Dr. Fate's just like,
what?
I don't know.
Oops.
I know. I guess I think the fans, there's a lot of talk always about exactly what physical form is resurrected, right? Like, were they cloned parts? Were they his original parts? A combination? I don't know that I've really thought about it all that much, to be perfectly honest.
I haven't either. But there were so many though, remember? Like there was, and so in each of them had something that was successful and something that was deemed or like worth saving, so that way it could be used in what new combination that they used for this Frankenstein Lex that they were going to try to put together.
Yeah. But then we get this scene in the burned out mansion between Clark and Lex that I've been quoting on so many podcast episodes over all of these years because it's one of my favorite things from the beginning. It's like, Lex, you still say it the same way after all these years. There's astonishment mixed with a hint of dread, yet with a hopeful finish. And they just launched.
So good.
It was so refreshing to see them together.
It was.
I mean, that had Rosenbaum not come back, had we not had this scene, I don't know, man, it would not be the same finale.
No, it wouldn't. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It wouldn't have worked, to be quite honest. And that's saying something, considering that, like, our documented thoughts on the finale. So saying that, like, it wouldn't have worked if they didn't bring it back. Like, imagine like that finale without his presence.
I know, it's crazy. And the dynamic that we get here is the dynamic that I have always longed for between the characters, where Lex knows, in fact, he explicitly calls him Kal-El at a certain point.
Yeah.
Yet there's no threat of exposing Clark's secret or anything like that. To the contrary, Lex's whole thesis in this conversation is that whereas in the past he tried to take Clark's destiny, he realizes now that it's time for him to embrace his own destiny, and that the great men and women of history are defined by their enemies. He and Clark are destined to be great men, but on opposite sides. And they're going to push each other and make each other better. How do you like that as a kind of summation of their dynamic?
I dig it. It kind of goes back to what I said earlier about, like, Charles and Magneto, or just rivals in general. Like we've had stories of people who are rivals who push each other, even though they're antagonistic on some sort of level, but without them, they don't reach what they need to reach. And so we can go, like, there's so many that we can go to, right? But there's lots of different dynamics where that works. And so you can't, it's that age old, like, you can't have one without the other type of deal. And this is kind of the embodiment of that.
Yeah. I mean, I love this so much. And the one thing that was interesting to me, well, not the one thing, but what stood out was that he says that the great men and women defined by their enemies, so they're going to be on opposite sides. But then he says explicitly, villain is only as great as his hero. So that's why Clark needs to step up to be the hero that the world needs to stop the darkness. And Clark's like, I don't know if Clark Kent can do it. And Lex is like, but we both know who can. Like, he knows the hero within that needs to step into the light and all that. But just the notion of Lex referring to himself as the villain. Again, I know we had Onyx, I'm the villain of the story and all that, but I don't know, when we look at something like Talisman, and then again in Descent, this idea that keeps coming up of, like, I need to protect the world in Arctic. Like, so I don't know, him thinking of himself as a villain in that sense, I don't know that quite lined up with how I think he sees himself.
I agree with you that I don't think he sees himself as a villain. I think that, again, that is there because it's the series finale, and you have the hero and the villain talking to each other.
Yeah.
Because again, like you think, like Magneto doesn't think of himself as a villain or a terrorist. He thinks of himself as a liberator and that's the savior of the mutant kind, right? He like, even though he does terrorist things. And the same can be said for a lot of different other people. Dr. Doom doesn't see himself as a villain, right? Darkseid doesn't see himself as a villain. Thanos either. Like, so like the list goes on and on and on.
Right. Yeah. So, and again, I can live with that language. I was happy to have Rosenbaum back, but that was the one thing I'm like, I don't know that I would see it that way, but we could have just stopped there. Would have been great.
Yeah, we could have,
but it's Smallville. It's Smallville. And we get the subsequent scene between Lex and Tess. Great that we got a scene between them. It had been revealed in season 10 that she was actually Luthor, the sister of Lex, illegitimate child of Lionel and Pamela Jenkins, going back to season 1.
I know, right?
Lex's old nanny, right? So great that they were going to share the screen together after all these years. I mean, that was fitting, I think, to have the two of them together. Lex plunges a knife into Tess, a fatal blow. But as she's dying, she touches Lex's face and reveals that she planted this neurotoxin on him, developed from the old Summerholt technology. And it, within 30 seconds, is going to erase every memory in his head. He'll remember nothing. He will be a blank slate before that moment.
The worst.
It's, to me, I think, looking at the life of the show, and as we've talked about, we love Smallville. There are a lot of things that frustrated us over the years, but I think this is the most significant and also the most egregious instance of the show missing its own point.
Yes.
The whole thing is the journey. Like, that's the whole thing.
That's correct. That's correct. And they missed it. They got to the goal line and fumbled the ball.
Does it ruin any part of the show, or does it ruin Lex's arc for you, or can you just kind of put it in a little box in your head?
I put that in a box.
Yeah. All right.
I put it in a box, man. That's one of the first things that went in there. It's like, nope.
I agree. In fact, so I didn't rewatch the entire 2-part finale for today, but I rewatched the Lex scenes, and I watched the Tess scene first, and then I watched the Clark scene, because that, to me, that's the note we end on. It's one of those things where I remember going into the finale, I was worried about mind wipes. I was worried that that characters' memories were going to be erased, because I thought that the show was going to feel like it needed to line up with the comics or just the traditional mythology. And I guess I was mostly worried about it in terms of Lois, but they let that go. And I assume maybe that's because in the comics, like, they are married and she knows the identity. I mean, here in the show, it's happening earlier, but still, it's like Lois knows.
Yes.
To this day, I genuinely don't think this was like a WB mandate that Lex had to forget. I think this was a choice that the showrunners made. I could be wrong. I don't know, but I think this was a choice that they made, and whether they just thought it was a good choice or they felt like they should sync up with Lex not knowing in the larger mythology. Again, I don't know, but it was the wrong call.
It was the wrong decision.
And what really bothers me, and I've thought about this a lot in the decade plus since this finale aired, is that there were so many other ways you could have gone. Like, for example, Lex didn't need to call Clark Kal-El in that previous scene.
No.
In fact, Lex could have had some line about, this doesn't need to be the exact lines, but something about, like, my memories are still kind of foggy after my resurrection. Death will do that to you, Clark. Something. Just to put a plant, if you want to plant the seed and be like, hey, well, we don't know exactly what Lex knows or not. Like, fine, I could live with that. Yeah. That's okay. But no, they planted that flag of he knows, he remembers everything.
And then take it away.
And every memory.
Everything. So it's like, what were we just watching? What was this all for?
Yeah, I don't really know what else to say other than it was the wrong call and it missed the point of their own show. And to this day, it really drives me nuts.
Yeah.
But I ignore it. I ignore it. And that's kind of...
Yeah. If I had my way, like, the finale would be Homecoming. So there we go.
Homecoming was a standout, no doubt.
Yeah, man.
And then, of course, we see Lex as the president in the future. So, again, with the whole mind wipe business, I really think you do have to put it aside. Otherwise, it just renders everything moot. I know the comics, then the season 11 comics, which, by the way, for any new audience members we have who are joining for this Trials of Smallville event, we did a whole episode years ago on the season 11 comics. So if you're curious, go check that out. I was not the biggest fan of the comics. I'm glad they exist, but they didn't really do for me what I wanted them to. But I know a big plot point there is Lex trying to regain his memories.
Yes.
And presumably, I don't know if they ever do this animated series that they're teasing. Maybe.
It doesn't seem like they're gonna.
I doubt they will. But maybe that'll be a thing that happens and we can kind of put this business behind us and it'll be undone or whatnot. I don't know. But it was, after all that, to get Rosenbaum back and to go out on that note, crazy.
Ridiculous. That's what it is. Just ridiculous.
But again, I can, like I said, I can kind of put it aside because I don't want it to take away from the very satisfying to me journey that Lex went on over the course of the series. And I mentioned at the top, I did want to just really quickly before we sign off say, I know we really haven't talked much yet about the crisis scene from the Arrowverse that Tom Welling and Erica Durant's return for. We've talked about it in other episodes over the years, but overall, what I would say is I do. Whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow is ultimately my preferred ending for the character of Superman in the mythology generally.
Really?
I think when we look at kind of different permutations of what might happen of him, living into the far future, outliving Lois, marrying Wonder Woman, Lois somehow being preserved. All in all, I think I like the idea of the God becoming man and being able to live out his life after his superhero journey has fully completed. And so the idea that ending was given to my favorite interpretation of the character, Tom Welling's Clark, I do like that. But for me, the missing piece is the kind of the story to get to that point.
Yeah.
Because I think the way it plays, it just sort of feels like, it is giving an ending to Clark that based on what we saw at the end of Smallville, he had moved past. That wasn't what he longed for anymore. Right. But again, I think there is a story that could be told. And the reason why I bring it up in the Lex episode is in that crisis scene, Clark mentions when Lex is brought up, he's like, I didn't know the president was in town. Right. In my mind, and this is total headcanon, we have nothing to support this, but in my mind, what kind of allows me to make some peace with that crisis scene is like, well, what if he found friendship again with Lex? What if there was some redemption for Lex? That would go a long way towards making me a lot more comfortable with that crisis ending, right? The idea that Lex is still out there and he's president, but Clark isn't Superman anymore. But maybe something happened there. Again, there's nothing to back this up, but in my heart, there's something that I kind of hold on to there about the chance for redemption for Lex. Do you see any kind of that sort of potential or no?
I guess that'd be possible. And I think honestly that since you bring it up, that's the only way that scene really kind of makes sense because there's no way Clark Kent would allow the Lex Luthor that had come to know on the show become president, and then do nothing about it. Same thing with Lois, and just kind of just live on the farm and just not care, shut off from the world, and not try to go out and save it. Like that's not what they do. And so as it's presented, it seems like that's what they're doing, which is unfortunately a thing that is in vogue to do with heroes. It's like, they give them a break. And so and they're just gonna, not do what they do. That's a whole thing that's happened across a whole lot of different IP. And I disagree with that because I think it misses the point. But to your point, if something had happened and Clark does what he does best is inspire people to do better, maybe that did happen. Maybe he becomes a president like the president in Red Sun, where he apparently it's written that he does good things and goes on to lead the world and do all these other things. Maybe that's what happens. Maybe, but we don't know.
Right. But that's my headcanon and I'm sticking to it. But
cool.
Is there anything we didn't say about Lex's journey that you wanted to? I know we said a lot, but
yeah, we did. Can't think of anything right now, but if I do, I'll get back to you.
Right on. One quick thing I did always love in Insurgents when Lex takes Jonathan to task for his sanctimonious platitudes. Just always love that line and love that moment. But no, overall, man, like it was it's been so fun kind of crisscrossing the series the way I have been, watching so many episodes that deal with Clark's journey and the overall show mythology, and then watching the relationship episode, then watching the Lex episodes. It's been great. Again, this is my favorite iteration of the Lex Luthor character. I think it's a complete and satisfying journey, absent that final scene in the finale. But because it's not flipping a switch. You really get to see all of the factors that kind of grow and build over time and kind of take him down this path. Yeah. And it's I think a very rich, rewarding journey. And look, with Clark, as we discussed, they eventually get him where he needs to be. But it's a long road, and there are a lot of times with Clark where, as we talked about, it's one step forward, two steps back. I dare say Lex's journey on the show is the most satisfying, I think.
Okay. I would kind of have to agree. I mean, as you said, and as they say, the hero's only as great as his villain, right? And again, lots of time and effort and energy was put into making this one as compelling a character as they did. They really did a great job with it. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Lance, I thank you so much for your time, your insight, reliving these memories, these episodes with me.
This was fun.
Good. Oh, I'm glad you had fun. So what would you like to tell folks about Always Hold On to Arrow?
Well, first and foremost, you can find us on Twitter at Do Not Fail Our Pod. On a little bit of a break right now, but when we come back, we will be doing season 7. So we don't have that much more to go in this show, which is kind of crazy with this journey that we've gone on with Arrow. We have this season, and then we have season 8, which is his own little mini thing. But we do have Crisis in there, so there's some things to look forward to.
Oh yeah, you make a meal out of Crisis.
Absolutely.
That'll be good. There's good. I mean,
there's good stuff still.
There's some good stuff in season, because 7 starts off, he's in prison, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I like that. That was good.
Yeah, I like that. There's some good stuff in there. Let's not bury the Arrowverse just yet. There's some still good moments in there, everybody.
Right on. Well, I don't share the level of passion you do for the Arrowverse. There's a lot that I can admire and I can appreciate about it. So yeah, I hope everyone will check out Always Hold On to Arrow, available on all major podcast platforms, and again on social media as well. So I thank you, Lance. I thank you, audience. Thank you for tuning into these episodes. I hope you're enjoying. We're not done yet. Over the coming weeks, we're going to be discussing Smallville's adaptations of the heroes of the DCU and the villains of the DCU. And we're going to wrap everything up by counting down our top 10 episodes of the entire series. So keep tuning in. And as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.